On behalf of the All India Federation of Tax Practitioners North Zone, I, C.H. Avijayan, the co-convener of the Indirect Tax Study Circle Committee North Zone, heartily welcome these 150 members in this beautiful and very, very relevant webinar on key jurisdictional issues and critical bottlenecks under GST. Today's topic is not a theoretical one, it's a very strategic and a very relevant topic where our advisory positions, our legal strategies are all dependent. And we are privileged that we have such an eminent speaker and distinguished leadership with us to share the discussion on this issue. So moving ahead, I request the chairman of the AIFTP North Zone, Anuj Bansalji, for his welcome address.
Thank you, Chavi ma'am. Good evening, respected speaker, CA Dr. Arpit Haldia ji, CA Rajendra Arora ji, convener of the Indirect Tax Study Circle Committee, co-convener CA Chavi Jain ji, then Advocate Vasu Goel, Advocate Vikas Fasji, other esteemed office bearers and executive members of AIFTP, fellow tax professionals, and all other participants. It is my privilege as chairman of North Zone to extend a warm welcome to each one of you to this webinar organized by our North Zone. As we mark the golden jubilee year of our cherished federation, 50 years of ethics, education, and excellence. Since its establishment on 11th November 1976, we remain loyal in pursuing the core objective for which AIFTP was founded. That is to impart quality education in taxation to practitioners across the country. This commitment to continuous learning and professional development is what has sustained AIFTP for half a century and continues to guide every initiative we undertake. Today's session is in continuation to this educational journey. Many of you would recall the highly enriching presentation delivered by Advocate Shri Vivek Lada from Mumbai on 15th January on the topic landmark decision under GST, which provided valuable insights to the audience. The same was very well appreciated by everyone. Today also, we have renowned speaker CA Dr. Arpit Haldia ji to address on a topic key jurisdictional issues and critical bottlenecks under GST. Thank you. And once again, a warm welcome to all. We look forward to an enlightening session. Over to Chavi Jain ji, co-convener and moderator of the webinar. Thank you, Chavi
Thank
ji.
you
Over
so
to you.
much, Chairman Sir, for
Hmm.
these motivating and encouraging words. Moving ahead and to further set the tone of the deliberations, I request the chairman of or the convener of the Indirect Tax Study Circle Committee, C.A. Rajendra Arora ji, for his welcome address and the opening remarks on this key relevant topic.
Thank you, Shaviji. Finally, I could make it. We are GST people, so we are very used to the technical glitches. So there is nothing new for us. After chairman of the North Zone, Anuj ji, I would also like to thank, first of all, my friend Dr. Arpit Haldia ji. He's a source of inspiration for all of us in the country in the GST field. And I welcome all the participants. Chairman sir, now it is 171 already, and people are continuously joining in anticipation that Arpit sir is here and he will certainly guide us to the moon, actually. So, in addition to that, we have our Vasu Goyal ji, Joint Secretary to the Federation, North Zone, and Yogesh Harjai ji also is with us, who is a executive member of the zone, North Zone, and also the part of the committee. We have with us Vikas Vasji also, who happens to be the secretary to the North Zone. Everybody is welcome. Vishal Sharma ji is also here, who is the vice chairman of the zone. Friends, so far as speaking about the topic, uh, frankly, whatever when I spoke with Arpit ji. So Arpit ji, I just hinted him out that, sir, we are looking forward to this particular scenario, the topic. Then he himself, I would say refined it and added beauty to the topic. So I would not be going much into the topic because Arpit ji is here to deal with that. But all I can say, because uh, I'm also I would be failing in my duty, not only as the convener of the study circle GST, but as myself, the student of law, that jurisdictional issues and the bottlenecks which we are facing in the execution of the law is very common these days. And frankly, friends, what Arpit ji would be speaking, please concentrate very carefully on that, because I would be only saying that the jurisdictional aspects, which are very fine, very minute, but having very significant impact over the execution, over the implementation of the law. Therefore, one need to be very, very mindful while reading and applying the law. So, uh, with this request to the all the participants, I would now request Vasuji. Now, first, I will go back to Chaviji. Chaviji, please take us forward with the further proceedings of the program. Thank you very much.
Thank you
And
so much, Convener sir. Thank you for your thoughtful insights on this relevant topic. And being the convener, you justify that we need to listen to Arpit sir very clearly for the nuances to read in between the lines what he's trying to say. Now, before we proceed with the technical sessions, it is important that we introduce the eminent speaker, and I request Advocate Vasu Goyal ji, the Joint Secretary of the AIFTP North Zone, to kindly do the same.
Thank you, Chavi ma'am. Respected Chairman sir, esteemed panelists, learned senior members, and my dear professional colleagues joining us from across the country. A very warm welcome to everyone present in today's AFTP webinar. It is truly a proud and exciting moment for me to introduce a personality who represents excellence, dedication, and continuous evaluation in tax profession, Advocate CA Dr. Arpit Haldia. Friends, in today's dynamic era where law changes very fast and interpretations change even faster, we need professionals who are just not knowledgeable but also visionary. Dr. Haldia is exactly that, a powerhouse of knowledge combined with real ground level experience. Just look at the academic strength he carries: CA, CS, ICWA, LLB, PhD, DIRM, DISA. This is not just qualification, this is complete ecosystem of taxation, law, accounts, and compliance expertise. And securing all India rank 36 in CA Intermediate clearly shows that excellence has been part of his journey right from the very beginning. With more than 21 years of professional experience, starting as a chartered accountant and now practicing as an advocate, he represents the perfect blend of compliance, litigation, and advisory expertise in GST. But what truly makes him stand out in his contribution to knowledge sharing, authoring 9 books on GST with 34 editions, is not just writing, it is shaping the understanding of GST for thousands of professionals. His books have become practical guides for the profession. And friends, his energy towards teaching and mentoring is simply inspiring. Since 2007, he has been continuously speaking at seminars, conferences, and study circles, guiding professionals, simplifying complex GST provisions, and making law practical for day to day implementation. Now, the main point is when institutions like ICI, NACIN, and government training institutes trust someone to train GST and CGST officers, it clearly shows the level of credibility and command he holds over the subject. In today's digital era, he has also built a massive knowledge outreach, writing about 700 GST blogs in last 7 years and creating a strong professional digital following shows His passion to ensure knowledge reaches every professional who needs it. Also, he has 40,000 plus followers on Twitter. Friends, professionals like Dr. Haldia don't just practice law, they shape the profession. They guide policy understanding, they mentor future professionals, and most importantly, they raise the standards of our professional fraternity. So, sir, on behalf of AFTP and personally from my side, I advocate Vasu Goyal, Joint Secretary of AFTP North Zone, express heartfelt appreciation for you for your outstanding contribution to the profession, to professional education, and to the GST ecosystem of our country. We are truly honored to have you with us today. I am sure today's session will be of full practical insights, clarity, and real life learning for all of us. With this, it is my privilege to welcome Advocate CA Dr. Arpit Haldia. Thank you.
Thank you, Vasu.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vasuji, for such a comprehensive and a graceful introduction of the eminent speaker. And now, with the great pleasure and honor, I respectfully invite the learned and eminent speaker, CA Dr. Arpit Haldia ji, to enlighten us on this key issue. And I finally say that virtually the podium is all yours, sir. We are eagerly waiting to listen to you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to extend my warm thanks to Anuj Bansalji, Rajendra Arora ji, Chavi madam, and Yogesh Harjai ji, my colleague who has been a regular, with whom I am in regular touch, and for such a nice introduction, Vasu Goyal ji. मैं तो बीच में जो सुनते हुए सोचा था कि मैं इतना अच्छा हूँ क्या so many adjectives and so many things you added in the resume and introduction. So thank you very much for a very nice introduction. Thank you, and thank you AIFTP for giving me this platform again in such a short span of time. I was there at the time of budget also when I delivered my speech on the recent changes in budget. And I got a call from Rajendra Raji about the subject, and he said that Arpit ji, we want to take on jurisdictional issues. So I thought that this is a subject which is not taken very commonly across the platforms, and that is why it is very important, because this forms the very foundation of the litigation. And what happens is normally is that whenever we receive a notice, like say we receive a notice for 3B versus 2A, we start to reply on the merit aspect that I have the invoice, I have received the goods, I have made the payment. But before going to that part, we ignore the jurisdictional aspect, that whether at all the officer has the power to invoke or start those proceedings. And not only that, when we speak and say that the officer does not have a jurisdiction, normally we associate it with the pecuniary power which have been given, like say 20 lakh, 2 crore, and more than 20 crore, more than 2 crore rupees. But in my opinion, the fact that the officer has a jurisdiction or not extends much beyond that. Let's take an example that for invoking section 74, the officer has to prove the essentials of the provision, which is that I have wrongly availed or utilized the ITC. I have not paid or short paid the tax. I have erroneously got the refund. Not only this, what additional he has to prove? He has to prove that this was done willfully with an intent to evade tax. Now, if he does not prove, if he merely proves that tax has not been paid or short paid, that does not mean that he acquires a jurisdiction under section 74. For acquiring jurisdiction under 74, not only the fact that tax has not been paid or short paid, he additionally has to prove that this was done with an intent to evade. And if it is not proved, that means the jurisdiction to acquire 74 is absent. So when we say about jurisdiction, it is the power, it is something what I say to acquire the power. And if I acquire a power under a certain section, that means the essential ingredients of those sections have to be fulfilled. So supposedly, a section requires that before acquiring the power, the reasons have to be recorded. And supposedly there are no reasons available on record. That means there is an absence of jurisdiction. And since there is an absence of jurisdiction, no power can be acquired by the officer, even though the proceedings might be within the monetary limit of that officer. So that is a very important thing, that whenever we start with a notice which has been issued, the essentials of those essentials of acquiring the power to issue the notice has to be seen, and it is not only linked with the monetary limits but also with the essentials of the provision which require the officer to prove the existence, and then only he can issue the notice. So that is something very important, and that is something we would be discussing in this session of the given time frame I have. Because normally what we do, normally we receive a notice, we see the monetary aspect, that yes, 20 lakh rupees, 2 crore rupees, more than 2 crore rupees, superintendent, assistant commissioner, additional commissioner, that is all checked by us. But how the jurisprudence is developing in GST, courts have now taken it to another level, wherein before analyzing the notice which has been issued, they are analyzing that whether the officer has satisfied the conditions. If he has not satisfied the conditions, then they say that there is an absence of jurisdictional fact. And once there is an absence of jurisdictional fact, then it becomes a matter which can be challenged before the Jurisdictional High Court under Article 226. See, let's take an example that an officer has issued a notice under Section 74. He has merely stated that you have wrongly availed ITC under Section 17, subsection 5. Now, there are two aspects attached to it. First, whether the ITC was availed with an intent to evade. Second, whether there was a violation of Section 17, subsection 5. So when I analyze these two provisions, first thing, that the intent to evade has to be proved by the officer, it is a jurisdictional fact, which has to be proved by the officer. And if he is not proving it, that means he does not have the power to issue a notice under Section 74. Leave aside the analysis on the merit aspect. So therefore, absence of an indication or an evidence in a notice that there was no intent to evade is a matter which relates or which attaches itself to the jurisdictional part. Now, once he proves that the ITC was wrongly availed with an intent to evade, the second thing which is to be proved is whether Section 17(5) is applicable or not. So when the matter comes about analysis or applicability of Section 17, subsection 5, it is an analysis of law. And when it comes to analysis of law, there is an alternative remedy of an appellate mechanism. But when it comes to absence of jurisdictional fact, it is a matter which can be challenged right before the Honorable High Court under Article 226, citing Article 14, that is an arbitrary exercise or exercise beyond the power which has been vested with the officer. See, that is why that is the difference between Section 73 and 74. For acquiring jurisdiction under Section 73, only thing which is to be proved is tax not paid, short paid, ITC wrongly availed, utilized or refund erroneously granted. But for acquiring jurisdiction under Section 74, what has to be proved additionally? That is not a matter of analysis of the law. That is a matter for acquiring the jurisdiction. That this was done with an intent to evade. So that is how we have to understand the entire aspect of acquiring the jurisdiction. It is not only the monetary limits which has to be seen, but it has to be the essential ingredients of the provision which have to be satisfied before invoking any action under that provision. Let's take another example, Section 83, wherein before making a provisional attachment, an opinion has to be formed by the commissioner that this is required to protect the interest of the revenue. Now, if there is no opinion on the record or the opinion is insufficient, that means the officer cannot acquire the jurisdiction under Section 83, leave aside provisional attachment was valid or not. So whenever we come across any terms in the statute which says that the officer should be satisfied. The officer should have recorded the reasons on the record. The officer should have a reason to believe. The officer should have felt that it is a necessity under the provisions of such statute. That means that this 4 conditions have to be fulfilled before initiating any action under the provision. So this is the first thing which I wanted to highlight, that whenever we are talking about jurisdiction, it is not only about the monetary limits. It is about the essential ingredients of the section which have to be fulfilled before acquiring the power. Because when we say, let's take about section 74 again, that a proper officer may issue a show cause notice. That means that provision is giving a power to the officer. Why? How that power is being given? That he has to prove those 2 aspects which we have discussed. But if he is not able to prove either of those 2, that means he does not have a jurisdiction. And that is why whenever we are filing an appeal or making a submission, and the notice has been issued under section 74, the aspect that intent to evade was not proved by the show cause notice or the order has to be the preliminary ground which we are making while drafting the appeal or while drafting the reply. Because whenever I am making a reply against a notice under section 74 and I am challenging that officer has not proved that the act was done with a willful mistake, with the intent of fraud or willful misstatement or suppression of facts, that means I am challenging his jurisdiction itself. And that's why it has to be a preliminary ground. And what is the preliminary ground? The ground which impacts the entire matter. So if the court comes to a conclusion that section 74 was incorrectly invoked because there was no intent to evade and the notice was issued after expiry of time period under section 73, that means the entire proceeding could go away, leave aside the merit aspect. So that is the importance of jurisdictional fact. So I have termed and referred my presentation as jurisdictional fact and analysis. And believe me, this term of jurisdictional fact, now it is being commonly referred in various judgments which are being pronounced by the court. It was a niche term which was very rarely heard when we were reading the judgments in GST regime in the initial period. But in last 1 or 2 years, this term is now being regularly quoted, and now this has become an essential ingredient of the litigation aspect for the professionals to understand that what is the scope of the jurisdictional fact. Before going on to the aspect of jurisdictional fact, let's revise and remember who is a proper officer and under which section the proper officer is being authorized. Section 2, clause 91 of CGST Act. It says proper officer in relation to any function to be performed under this act means the commissioner or the officer of the central tax who is assigned that function by commissioner in the board. That means the commissioner is the proper officer or the officer who has been assigned that function by the commissioner in the board. How the commissioner in the board would be assigning the function to the officer of central tax? That has been assigned by way of 2 circulars. Circular number 1/1/2017, which is pertaining to registration, and second, registration and composition, and second is circular number 3/3/2017, which pertains to all other functions other than registration and composition. And the first thing which we have to see whenever we receive a notice, that which officer has issued the show cause notice. Supposedly a superintendent has issued the show cause notice. then we have to refer circular number 1/1/2017 or 3/3/3/2017 to see that for that section under which the notice has been issued, who is the proper officer in those two circulars. This is the basic thing which we need to do at the start of preparation of any reply or a preparation of any appeal. So let's take an example. I have received a show cause notice under section, say, I have received a notice for conducting an audit under section 65. And thereafter, I have received a draft audit report. Now, once I have received a draft audit report, it is being signed by a particular authority. Once it is being signed by a particular authority, I have to see that under the rule in which the draft audit report is being issued, who is the proper officer referred under circular number 3/3/2017. So this is all about proper officer and how to identify the proper officer for initiation, for starting or commencing a proceeding or any inquiry under GST. Now, what is a jurisdictional fact? The basic understanding of what is a jurisdictional fact. I have tried to summarize the concept of jurisdictional fact from various decisions which have been given by the court. The basic aspect of jurisdictional fact, the fact or facts upon which the jurisdiction of a court, a tribunal, or an authority depends can be said to be a jurisdictional fact. So any fact upon which the authority of an officer or a court or a tribunal depends is a jurisdictional fact. So when we say about section 74, that two facts have to be proved. The first is tax not paid, short paid, ITC wrongly availed, utilized, or refund erroneously granted. This is the first fact on which the authority of the officer depends, that he has to prove that. And the second fact upon which the authority of the officer depends is there has to be a willful misstatement or suppression of facts or a fraud. So once these two facts are proved, then only he can acquire the authority, and this is called a jurisdictional fact. We might think that this is a technical term, but this is a very simplistic term, that any fact upon which the authority of an officer depends is a jurisdictional fact. Now, what is the importance of a jurisdictional fact? That was discussed by Honorable Madras High Court in case of Niyamo Enterprise. This is the 2026 judgment, recent November 2025, wherein Honorable High Court divided the proceedings in two parts. The first is proceedings being held illegal due to absence of a principle of natural justice, that the opportunity of hearing was not given. This is the first aspect that they discussed. And the second aspect that they discussed was absence of jurisdictional fact. Like in example, I said that while issuing a notice under section 74, the intent to evade was not proved. So how Honorable Madras High Court distinguished between the two proceedings? First, where there was absence of principle of natural justice, and second, where there was absence of jurisdictional fact. Honorable High Court noted, I am reading it verbatim because then only we would be able to understand the emphasis and the importance of a jurisdictional fact. They said that executive orders are often set aside on the ground of violation of principle of natural justice. The statute would provide for issuance of notice, but without issuing such notice, an adverse order would be passed. When such orders are set aside, the writ court has to remand the matter. The authority has to be given liability to proceed afresh. Therefore, whenever an order is passed without giving an opportunity to being heard or an absence of principle of natural justice, the writ court would send the matter back to the authority. They would not quash the proceedings, they would send the matter to the authority to hear it afresh. But when the jurisdictional fact is absent, What was observed by the Honorable Court is, but when jurisdictional facts are absent, the order has to be set aside and the court will have to stop at that. If a notice has been issued by an officer going beyond his authority without proving the intent to evade, going beyond the monetary limits provided by the circular, the court cannot remand it. They would have to set aside and stop at that. The presence of the jurisdictional fact alone confers power on the authority to initiate action and proceed in the matter. Their absence would completely undermine the very foundation itself. In such cases, question of making remand does not arise at all. So if I am able to prove before the court that there was an absence of jurisdictional fact, the court would not be remanding the matter to hear it afresh. They would have to hold the entire proceedings illegal. But if I would be arguing that I was not given an opportunity of being heard, the court at best would remand the matter afresh, remand the matter for being heard afresh. So this is the gravity of a jurisdictional fact. Now there is a host of decisions, but I have taken certain specific decisions, both from pre-GST regime or not only from GST, but from other statutes as well. Wherein Honorable Court in Arun Kumar and others versus Union of India 2006 judgment said, a jurisdictional fact is a fact which must exist before a court, tribunal, or authority assumes jurisdiction over a particular matter. The underlying principle is that by erroneously assuming existence of such jurisdictional fact, no authority can confer upon itself jurisdiction which it does not possess. Sometimes what happens is, I have received a notice, say by a superintendent, and the demand amount is say 50 lakh rupees. Now, issuing a notice of a tax amount of 50 lakhs, the power rests with the assistant commissioner. During the course of hearing, supposedly I am not able to challenge it before the officer. It does not, my submission does not contains reference to the absence of power with the officer to issue a show cause notice beyond, containing a demand of say 50 lakh rupees. The order is decided. Now, when the matter comes before the appellate authority, a fresh ground is inserted at the time of appeal. Can the appellate authority say that why it was not raised before the officer, and since it was not raised before the officer, I will not decide it? And can section 160 be applicable in such cases? In my humble opinion, section 160 is not applicable in such cases because it only speaks about service of notice. So if I am not challenged about service of notice, then there is a bar upon me to challenge it subsequently. But in case wherein the authority did not have the power to issue a show cause notice, and supposedly it was not challenged before him, and it is for the first time challenged before the appellate authority, can the appellate authority say that I will not hear, and since it was not challenged, in my opinion, humble opinion, he cannot do so, because officer can only be given a power to issue show cause notice by the commissioner in the board. That is section 2 clause 91. Section 2 clause 91 does not say that if an assessee has not challenged, any officer who issues a show cause notice would become a proper officer. Section 2 clause 91, if we read it again, it says proper officer in relation to any function to be performed under this act means the commissioner or the officer of the central tax who is assigned that function by the commissioner in the board. If the intent of the law would have been that the assessee has to challenge it for the first time before the officer himself, and he cannot raise a subsequent ground, because he cannot raise the ground subsequently, they would have mentioned it here that the office of the central tax who assigned that function by the commission, the board, or by the assessee who has not challenged it before the respective officer. So in my humble opinion, the fact of challenging the jurisdiction of an officer can be challenged at any point of time. Preferably, it should be done at the first point, and even if it is not done, then it should be raised at the point of time when we come to know. Second aspect is, now this is a summary of the decisions. If the jurisdictional fact does not exist, the court or authority or officer cannot act, and no court in the country can confer a jurisdiction to the officer who does not have a jurisdiction. It is incumbent upon the officer who is issuing a show cause notice to have the jurisdiction prior to issuance of a notice or commencing the proceedings. But subsequently, no court by its judgment can say that yes, even if the superintendent has issued a show cause notice of 50 lakh rupees, we treat it correct and we will decide it on merit. The court does not have a power, save in exceptional circumstances, which I believe exists in case of Article 142. So this is a background of jurisdictional fact. Now coming to the examples of jurisdictional fact or an absence of jurisdictional fact in GST regime. The first is the question of limitation involves question of jurisdiction. The finding of the fact on question of jurisdiction would be a jurisdictional fact. So if a notice has to be issued, say, in 2 years and 9 months, and a notice is issued beyond that, it is a question of jurisdictional fact. First, it has to be decided, then only the matter can be decided on merit. And that's why this jurisdictional fact is not only applicable on the department, it is also applicable on the taxpayer. And that's why when I file an appeal before the appellate authority beyond 120 days, there's an absence of jurisdictional fact because I don't have the power to file an appeal beyond 120 days. And that becomes a question involving the limitation. And once the limitation has expired, that means my power to file an appeal has also expired. And once it is expired, no matter how strong it is on merit, it would not be decided on merit. And it would be decided on the limitation aspect because that is a jurisdictional fact. Now, there are 3 decisions which I have referred, and although I have discussed it number of times during my initial discussion only, power to invoke Section 74. In NCS Pearson INC versus Union of India, a Karnataka High Court judgment in 2021, it's a beautiful judgment if anyone has to understand the scope of jurisdictional fact. And it says vesting itself with the power under Section 74 is a question of jurisdictional fact, and the officer has to prove both these facts. Parmore Homes and Shelters, Karnataka High Court again, and the Niyamo Enterprise decision by Madras High Court, these all 3 judgments are on Section 74. And recently, an SLP also has been filed before the Honorable Apex Court, and one of the cases, Honorable Apex Court has stayed the matter precisely on the reason that the show cause notice did not prove the jurisdictional fact that there was an intent to evade while either the tax was not paid or short paid, ITC was wrongly availed or utilized, or refund was erroneously granted. In another case of Arupa Nandadhal, this is a case of Section 63. Now, see what was observed by Honorable High Court, Odisha High Court. Glance at provision contained in Section 63 would reveal that the assessing officer is vested with the power to invoke jurisdiction under Section 63 inter alia in the event taxpayer fails to obtain registration even though liable to do so. So what was the requirement on the part of the officer before he invoked the jurisdiction under Section 63? That he had to prove that the taxpayer failed to obtain registration even though he was required to do so. What Honorable High Court observed, that the evidence available on record is silent about the existence of such jurisdictional fact. Therefore, the proceedings are illegal. So before acquiring the power under Section 63, before acquiring the jurisdiction under Section 63, what is required to be proved? That there was a taxable person who failed to obtain the registration, even though he was required to do so. So there are three conditions which have to be fulfilled, and only then the power under Section 63 can be acquired. And if they are not, that means there is an absence of jurisdictional fact. There was no jurisdiction with the officer to invoke the powers under Section 63. Now, in case where a registration is cancelled, what the provision says that there has to be default of 6 months. Now, supposedly there is no default of 6 months, there is a lesser default than the period of 6 months. So what Honorable Kerala High Court said, that since the assessee has indeed filed the return of May 2019 on 10th of December 2019, it goes beyond any doubt that as on the date of issuance of the order, that is on 10th of December 2019, the assessee had only 5 months continuous default and not the mandatory 6 months continuous default. Therefore, it is an absence of jurisdictional fact. Because the assessing officer does not have the power to acquire jurisdiction to cancel the registration of the taxpayer because the default was less than 6 months for filing of the returns. Now, another example. This is from Kumar Traders, Guwahati High Court. This is the decision of March 2024, wherein an investigation agency acquired the jurisdiction to investigate for offences mentioned in Schedule 2 of a notification. What Honorable Guwahati High Court said, that in the present case, the jurisdictional fact to investigate by BIEO, that is the investigation agency, must relate to offences as enumerated in Schedule 2 of the notification. If the jurisdictional fact does not exist, the BIEO authority cannot act. So therefore, if the investigation agency had to exercise the power, they can only exercise the power provided the offences were under Schedule 2 of the notification. If the offences are under some other schedule, even though the offense might have been committed, but since the investigation agency did not have the power, they cannot investigate and conclude it. Now, another interesting decision in case of Goa University. This is a judgment by Honorable Bombay High Court, wherein the question was that whether affiliation fees being charged by the universities is liable to tax. Normally, we understand that this is a matter of interpretation of Section 7. But how the court interpreted, because this has been relied upon in another judgment by Karnataka High Court, this observation of Bombay High Court. What they said, that the amounts that are chargeable to tax arise on account of supply of goods or services or both, and in the absence of this, the show cause notice would be bad on jurisdictional fact. So what is the meaning of this? That the officer in GST would only acquire the power to assess once an activity or a transaction is a supply. If the transaction itself is not a supply, then it is an absence of jurisdictional fact, because then the transaction is beyond the four corners of GST Act, and once the transaction itself is beyond the four corners of GST Act, the officer under GST has no jurisdiction to analyze or assess it. It is completely a different thing that what is the correct tax rate vis-a-vis whether the transaction itself is taxable under GST or not. So when I am challenging that the transaction itself is not covered under GST, I am making a challenge to the jurisdictional fact because an officer in GST only has the power to assess a transaction which is covered within the four corners of GST statute. But when I am challenging a tax rate, it is a matter of legal interpretation. It is not a matter of jurisdictional fact. See, a subtle change in the argument would change the entire argument, entire matter, entire case. In another matter of section 83, which I have also referred earlier, wherein Honorable Madras High Court said, and they relied upon three judgments of the pre-GST regime of Honorable Apex Court, wherein they said that existence of a jurisdictional fact is sine qua non or a condition precedent for exercise of power by a court or a limited jurisdiction, and if the impugned order does not discloses the application of mind by the respondent to existence of jurisdictional fact, that is, if there is no opinion formed or the opinion is not proper, then it is an absence of jurisdictional fact which vitiates the proceedings. So whenever we are drafting an appeal, we have to be very mindful of the fact that what is a jurisdictional fact and what is not a jurisdictional fact, and anything which is a jurisdictional fact, and if I'm challenging it, it has to be my preliminary ground that this has to be decided before deciding the grounds on merit. And believe me, how I sequence my grounds, that becomes how the matter is decided. And that is the relevance of analyzing the grounds, the importance, and how they have to be placed. So now this is the basic discussion about the jurisdictional fact. These were the decisions which have come on this aspect. Now, let's take one step ahead and let's try to analyze various situations which might come before us. The first is, and this is very practical, which each one of us is facing, levy of penalty under section 122 and 125. I would not be discussing about the merits for levy of penalty, the 21 offenses under section 121, the offense under 122 1A, 122 2, 122 3. I would only be discussing who is the proper officer for levy of penalty under section 122, 125, because whenever I am receiving a notice, as we have discussed, the first thing which we have to see that whether at all the officer had the power to invoke the jurisdiction and the power under that provision. So the first thing is, who is the proper officer for levy of penalty under section 122 and 125? And believe me, for the notices which we have received, in my opinion, what we are going to discuss, I would not be saying that this would be upheld by the courts or what would be held by the courts, but this should be the preliminary ground whenever we are replying to a notice for issuance or for levy of penalty under section 122. But before that, let's try to understand the scheme of the statute. See, the basic thing, whenever we are reading GST Act, whenever a provision is empowering a proper officer to do any act, that provision would always state that the proper officer may direct, the proper officer may issue, the proper officer may exercise. That provision would be making a reference to the proper officer. And once that provision is making a reference to the proper officer, for that section, under 2 clause 91, read with circular 1/1/2017 or 3/3/2017, there has to be a mention of an officer who would be the proper officer for that provision. So supposedly, I have received a notice under section 123. What I would do, I would read section 123. Section 123 says that if a person who is required to furnish a information written under section 50 fails to do so within the period specified in the notice under subsection 3 thereof, the proper officer may direct. That means section 123 has a reference to proper officer. If we read through section 127, it says that where the proper officer is of the view, that means it makes a reference to the proper officer. So when I am receiving a notice under section 123 or 127, I would read 123 and 127. I would see, yes, there is a reference to proper officer under 123 and 127. Next thing what I would do, I would go to circular number 3/3/2017. I would see who is the proper officer for section 123 or section 127. When I see proper officer for section 123 and 127, it is Deputy or Assistant Commissioner of Central Tax. That means any officer below Deputy or Assistant Commissioner of Central Tax cannot issue a notice under section 123 or 127. So this is how I would read through a section and I would identify the power of a proper officer, power of an officer become my proper officer by invoking a jurisdiction under the relevant provision. So this is how we would understand. Now, once I read section 122 or section 125 for that matter, section 122 subsection 1 says where a taxable person who, it stops there. After this, it refers to 21 offenses under section 122 subsection 1. If I read through section 125, it says any person who contravenes any of the provisions of this act, any rules made thereunder for which no penalty is separately provided for this act, shall be liable to a penalty which may extend to 25,000 or 25,000 rupees. Now, one would say that why are you reading 122 and 125? And what is the difference between a section of 122 or 125 vis-a-vis section 123 and 127? The difference is when section 123 and 127 we read, it makes a reference to the proper officer. That means the proper officer would be referred in 2 clause 91, read with those two circulars. But when I read section 122 and 125, there is no reference to the proper officer. And when the section itself is not making a reference to the proper officer, who can exercise that power? That has not been mentioned in the section itself. That means an officer under the statute is not empowered to even take an action under section 122, 125, leave aside levy of penalty or to be decided on merits. And this was precisely which was argued in case of Patanjali matter before Honorable Allahabad High Court, and the matter is now pending before the Honorable Apex Court. That when section 122 and 125 are not referring to, not making a reference to the proper officer, whether at all an officer under GST regime itself is empowered to initiate an action under section 122 or 125. Because if the intent would have been there, they would have made a reference under 122 and 125, similar to what is being referred under section 123 or 127. This is the first argument. Now the second argument, that for a moment, I assume that an officer under the GST regime is empowered to initiate an action under section 122 and 125. Then who is the proper officer? For that, again, I would have to go to circular number 3/3/2017. And interestingly, if you would refer to this circular, there is no mention of section 122 in the entire circular. So that means, if at all there was a proper officer for 122, for a moment, for making this, for the sake of making argument, even if I assume that an officer under GST is empowered to initiate action under section 122, then at least this circular should have mentioned it. But this circular is not making any reference to section 122, and the board came to this understanding, and by way of circular number 254 dated 27th October 2025, now for the purpose of section 122, additional or joint commissioner, deputy or assistant commissioner, or superintendent of central tax, all have been made the proper officer with respect to the monetary limits which they have assigned. So now what's the big thing? First, this circular is only prospective. That means it is not operating retrospectively. It is not giving power to these officers to issue notice which have been issued prior to 27th of October 2025. So any notice which have been issued prior to 27th October 2025 under section 122, my second alternative ground is that it is having an absence of jurisdictional fact, because the power, even if I assume that it is there for an officer under GST, it has only been given post 27th October 2025. So these are the two things when we are analyzing section 122 or 125 notices. I'm not saying that this discussion is only limited to section 122, 125. This principle is applicable on all the provisions in GST. This is only an example to how to read or understand through these provisions. Now, let's take another provision that discussion, that who is the proper officer to issue a draft audit report. The example which I have cited. Another, this is only an example to just to analyze and see how it has to be interpreted. Supposedly an audit is completed. A notice under section 65 is issued. I produced my documents, my audit is complete. Now the officer is ready with his draft audit report. I receive a draft audit report stating that these were the discrepancies which were found. And since these were the discrepancies, you are required to either explain or pay these amounts. Now, this is contained in Rule 101, Sub-Rule 4 of the CGST rules. And if we read through this rule verbatim, it says, Rule 104 of CGST provide that the proper officer may inform the registered person. Again, it is making a mention to proper officer, that the proper officer may inform the registered person of the discrepancies noticed, and if any as observed in the audit, and the said person may file his reply, and the proper officer, again a reference to proper officer, shall finalize the finding of the audit after due consideration of the reply furnished. Rule 1014 sub-rule 4 makes a reference to proper officer. That means we have to check circular number 3/3/2017, and when we check circular number 3/3/2017, this power to issue a draft audit report, not ADT02 final audit report, a draft audit report intimating the discrepancies. In point number 28, if we see Rule 101 sub-rule 4, it is only given to deputy or assistant commissioner of central tax. That means if a superintendent is issuing a draft audit report, there is an absence of jurisdictional fact, and since there is an absence of jurisdictional fact, and the draft audit report is the fundamental, is the foundation of the proceeding. If the foundation itself is gone, the entire proceeding would also go. Another example of composition scheme. Normally what happens is that when we receive a notice, it says that the dealer had crossed the limit under provided under section 10 of 1.5 crore rupees. Therefore, he is outside the composition scheme. Therefore, we are levying the tax and we are not allowing the ITC. So three things are being done in one single order. First, the taxpayer is being taken out of the composition scheme. Second, he is being asked to pay the tax on the entire turnover being considered as without the composition scheme. Third, the ITC also is being denied, citing provision of section 16 subsection 4. So one single notice is doing three acts. Now again we have to see that what is the proper procedure and who is the proper officer. Now when we read through rule 6 sub rule 4, it says where the proper officer, again a reference to the proper officer. Why am I emphasizing the term proper officer? So that whenever we go after this session and whenever we are reading through the provision, the first habit which we develop is whenever we read a proper officer, we check circular number 3/3/2017 or 1/1/2017. So rule 6 sub rule 4 says where the proper officer has reasons to believe that the registered person was not eligible to pay tax under section 10 or has contravened the provision of the act or provision of this chapter, he may issue a notice to such person in GST CMP 05. To show cause the notice, the taxpayer has to reply in CMP 06. The order has to be given in CMP 07. So rule 6.4 and 6.5 provides a entire procedure for taking the dealer out of the composition scheme, but it is not providing the power to determine the tax payable. Which provision is providing the power to determine the tax payable? Section 10 subsection 5. And it says if the proper officer has reasons to believe, again a reference to proper officer, that the taxable person has paid the tax under subsection 1 or subsection 2A as the case may be, despite not being eligible, such person shall in addition to tax may be payable, would be liable to penalty under provision of section 74. Now there are two provisions, rule 6 sub rule 4 and section 10 subsection 5. Rule 6 provides for taking out of the composition scheme. Section 10 subsection provides for determination of tax liability. And if we go through circular number 1/1/2017, the power to take someone out of the composition scheme is given in rule 6. That can be exercised by superintendent of central tax. The power to determine the tax payable is under 10 subsection 5. That is only with the assistant commissioner or deputy commissioner. That means not only superintendent cannot exercise the power to determine the tax payable under 10 subsection 5. Secondly, both proceedings, that is taking out of the composition scheme and determination of liability, are two different things. And therefore, first the proceeding under rule 6 should be carried out. The dealer should be taken out of the composition scheme. He should be allowed to file an appeal against that order, because that is also an appealable order. And once he is taken out of the composition scheme, he should be allowed to file the returns. Once he files the returns and he takes the credit, then a separate order under section 16 subsection 4 for denying the credit or for determination of tax liability should be passed. And if the entire procedure is being done in one single notice, that means this is beyond the jurisdiction. There is an absence of jurisdictional fact. Now, another practical aspect, that who is the proper officer for levy of late fees or interest? What happens normally is that we receive a show cause notice that you have filed an annual return, say after 2 years. So there is a delay of 730 days, and therefore you are liable to pay penalty late fees of say 1,50,000 rupees. Normally what they do, what the notice does is either it issues, it refers to section 73, read with section 47, or it only refers to section 47. Now there are two scenarios. First, section 73 read with 47, and second is independent application of section 47. If I go through section 73, in my humble opinion, section 73 can never be invoked for recovery of late fees, because it only provides for recovery of tax, interest and penalty. So if section 73 is being invoked to recover late fees, then there is an absence of jurisdiction, because 73 does not provide the power to the officer for invoking the jurisdiction for issuing the notice under section 73 for recovery of late fees. And that is the precise reason, because in circular number 238, which was for clarification in case of amnesty scheme, wherein they said that late fees is not covered under amnesty scheme. Why? Because they knew that section 73 can never be invoked for recovery of late fees. And once section 73 can never be invoked for recovery of late fees, and since the amnesty scheme itself was only for section 73, therefore late fees was not covered in amnesty scheme. This is my understanding, that why late fees as per them was not covered under the amnesty scheme. So first thing, whenever 73 read with 47 has been issued, in my opinion, it cannot be done, because 73 is not pertaining to late fee. It is only pertaining to interest, tax, and penalty. Now coming to second scenario, wherein only section 47 has been invoked. Just reminding ourselves the basic fundamental of reading the statute, that wherever the lawmakers intended that the power has to be vested with the proper officer under a particular section, they have made a reference to the proper officer. And once they have made a reference to the proper officer, it has to be seen by reading section 2 clause 91, read with circular 1/1/2017 or 3/3/2017. This is the basic fundamental which we have discussed up till now. Now in this context, we read section 47. And it says, any registered person who fails to fund the details of outward supplies or supplies required in section 37 or returns required in section 39 or section 35 or 45 or section by the due date shall pay a late fees of 100 rupees for every day during which such failure continues subject to maximum amount of 5,000 rupees. Now, this is the late fees, and if we go through 47.2, this is for annual return. Section 47 does not make a reference at any point of time to a proper officer. And since it does not make a reference to the proper officer, circular number 1/1/2017 or circular number 3/3/2017 also does not make a reference to section 47. And that's why in those circular also there is no proper officer for section 47. So in my humble opinion, whenever we are receiving a notice for recovery of late fees for delayed filing of annual return, invoking section 47 subsection 2, the first reply should be that the section 47 does not authorize any officer in GST to recover late fees. And secondly, even circular number 1/2017 or 3/2017 also does not make a reference to or empower any officer in GST for carrying out any decision. The next scenario is sometimes when the tax is paid, but interest is not paid, we receive a notice under section 50 for recovery of interest. Now, if we go through section 50 subsection 1, which I have given at the bottom of my slide, even section 50 subsection 1 by itself does not make a reference to proper officer, and only section 73 makes a reference to proper officer, wherein it says that the proper officer may issue a notice for recovery of tax along with interest payable under section 50 subsection 1. So a notice cannot be issued merely under section 50. It has to be accompanied either with section 73 or section 74, but independently a notice under section 50 can never be issued. So that is how I would read and understand a notice which has been issued solely under section 50 or a notice which has been solely issued under section 47 for recovery of late fees, or a notice which has been issued under section 73 read with 47 for recovery of late fees.
ड्राफ्ट केसेस ठीक है, जैसे अब ये मैंने दूसरा लॉगिन दूसरे डीलर का किया है.
Now one last thing which I skipped. What if there is no limitation in the statute for taking an action? Till when the jurisdiction can be exercised? Because again, as we have discussed, the question of limitation is a question of jurisdictional fact. And if we go through section 122, if we go through section 125, if we go through section 75, subsection 12, there is no limitation mentioned in those sections. If we go through section 76 also, for that matter, there is no limitation mentioned in the provisions. So does it mean that an action can be taken for an indefinite period under those provisions? So supposedly a notice has to be issued for 2017-18 under section 122, and 20 years down the line, can I receive a notice under section 122 stating that you have committed a default in 17-18 and we are initiating a proceeding by issuing a show cause notice under section 122 in 2037-38? Honorable Apex Court, in case of State of Jharkhand versus Shivam Coke Industries, that is a pre-GST regime judgment, but equally applicable in GST, given in 2011, 10 taxman.com 561 said that it is a right that if no period of limitation has been prescribed, statutory authority must exercise its jurisdiction within a reasonable period. What, however, should be the reasonable period would depend upon the nature of the statute, rights and liabilities thereunder, and other relevant factors. So if a provision is not giving any time limit, there has to be a reasonable period. What would be a reasonable period would depend upon the nature of the statute, the rights and the liabilities. So in my humble opinion, even if section 122, leaving aside who can issue the show cause notice, even if section 122 is not providing any time limit, a notice under section 122 can only be issued within a reasonable period. And now what is a reasonable period? If we go through the entire schema of the statute, one thing which is running common across the statute, if there is an intent to evade, the time limit for conclusion of proceedings is 5 years. If there is no intent to evade, the time limit for conclusion of proceedings is 3 years. So if a recovery is being made, or if a notice is being issued under section 122 on a taxable person, either it has to be issued within a period of completed within a period of 3 years, looking to the schema of the statute, then the authority is not required to prove that the offense was committed with an intent to evade. Secondly, if an extended period is being used for issuing a show cause notice, for levy of penalty under section 122, the officer would have to prove that there was an intent to evade, looking to the scheme of the statute, and the reasonable period has to be determined in context of the statute. So that is how I would read through and understand the limitation period under section 122 or 125 or 76, or for that matter, section 75-12 also. Although section 76 might stand on a different footing, because in that case, a person has collected the tax, having the knowledge that tax was not to be collected, and that was tax collected but not deposited. So in that case, the things might differ, but yes, the reasonable period has to be determined in that context. So this was about the jurisdictional fact and section 5 and section 2 clause 91. Now coming to another important scenario for identifying and assessing the jurisdiction of an officer, and that is coming from Armor Security Limited. See, one thing which in my opinion many of us are committing is that we are treating the decision in Armor Security only for cross empowerment, wherein two authorities are carrying out simultaneous proceedings. When we read through the entire decision, the decision is going beyond the cross empowerment also, and has laid down very critical reasons for conducting a proceeding in a valid manner. And if I bifurcate or divide the judgment, it can be divided in 10 parts. The first is overview of provision of section 6. The second and the one of the most important aspect is how Honorable Apex Court has upheld the supremacy of self-assessment. And what is the relevance of self-assessment that we will discuss when we will discuss this part 2. Third, they have held what is an intelligence-based action. Fourth, what is the scope of issuance of a summon in GST? Fifth, what is the importance of show cause notice in GST? See, whenever we are replying to a show cause notice and we are saying that the show cause notice is benefit of any reason, it is arbitrary, it is not providing any relied upon document, it is not providing any evidence. Which decision we are relying upon? Brindavan Beverages, which says that show cause notice is the foundation of the assessment proceedings. Believe me, if we go through this entire decision of armor security, as I have said on multiple platforms, the judgment in armor security is the Brindavan Beverages of GST regime. And when we will discuss the judgment in this part, importance of show cause notice, we will come to know that what are the important ingredients which the Honorable Apex Court had held in case of a show cause notice. And since this is a GST regime judgment, the officers would be double bounded. I am not saying that they are not bound by the GST pre-GST regime judgment. But what happens commonly is that whenever we refer to a pre-GST regime judgment, it is commonly said that, sir, this is not a GST regime judgment. We will not follow it. But this is a GST regime judgment. Part 6 is conditions to be followed by authority issuing a valid show cause notice. Part 7, for the purpose of arriving at the initiation of proceedings, what is the difference between an issuance of a summon and issuance of an SCM? Part 8, meaning of the phrase same subject matter. Part 9, same subject matter and logical conclusion of a matter. What is the scope of logical conclusion? Supposedly, a search has been conducted against a taxable person. The officer under anti-evasion says that these are the discrepancies which I have found out. Whether you are ready to pay. The taxpayer says that yes, I am ready to pay. He pays all the things, all the amount. And the officer in anti-evasion closes the proceedings without issuance of a show cause notice. Can it be said that the proceedings have reached a logical conclusion and now no officer on same subject matter can initiate a fresh proceeding? Or many a times, what happens is that when the audit is being conducted, a taxpayer produces all the documents. But when ADT 02 is issued, it only contains the issues on which the discrepancy has been identified. Can it be said that for other than the issues for which the discrepancy has been identified, whether the other issues have also been logically concluded, or it only would be said that the office has only applied the mind on the issues which have been identified as a discrepancy, and for all the other issues, they have not applied their mind? And part 10, what to do when similar investigation being carried out by both central and state division? Supposedly, there was a search which was carried out against a person. And a summon was issued wherein entire books of accounts were sought. And after verifying the entire books of account, the anti-evasion department listed out 12 deficiencies. And of those 12 deficiencies, the taxpayer paid and replied to all of them, and all those were concluded. Now, post that, an audit notice under section 65 is issued. What has to be done by the taxpayer in such circumstances? This is all given in these 10 parts. It is not that these 10 parts are given in a para-wise in sequence. What I have tried to do is I have tried to pick the relevant paras and put it in a issue-based manner. So the part 1 is overview of provision 6, wherein Honorable Apex Court in Armor Security has said that what is the objective of section 6, what is stipulated by section 6 subsection 1, what is the provision of 6.2a says, and what does the provision of 6.2b says. All this is something which one will read and understand, because it is only an explanation of what has been given in section 6. So I would not be going in this part. And whenever the presentation is received by the participants, they can go, because there is limitation of time. So I would like to discuss on some other aspects given in this judgment in detail, because those issues are being faced by us at many points of time. So this is part 1, that is overview of provision 6. Now coming to part 2, supremacy of self-assessment. Now this is something which we have to understand, because in my opinion, this is one of the most important observations which the Honorable Apex Court has given in armor security, wherein they said that GST regime in para 46, GST regime operates on the principle of self-assessment as enshrined in section 59 of the CGST Act. Hence, all provisions are to be read in consonance and not in derogation of section 59. That is, all provisions are to be read in consonance and not in derogation of section 59. What is the importance of this phrase? See, in what section 59 says is that a registered person has to self-assess his liability, claim the credit, and pay the net tax and file a return under section 39. So whenever I am filing a return under section 39 and I am getting an acknowledgement of filing of 3V, this is the first assessment which has been completed in GST regime. If we go through definition of assessment given in section 2 clause 13, it says assessment includes determination of tax. It says assessment means determination of tax under the provisions of this act and includes self-assessment. So therefore, whenever I am filing a return, it is not just filing of a return. This is the first assessment which has been completed in GST regime. And when the first assessment is completed, because section 2 clause 13 in assessment puts self-assessment on the same pedigree of determination of tax under section 73 or 74. So when the first assessment is complete, the responsibility to challenge that the self-assessment was incorrect is on the department. It is not on the assessee to prove that I have made the correct assessment. And that is precisely the reason that why we find section 155 in the statute. Because section 155, which speaks about burden of proof, is an exception to section 59, wherein it says that the burden to prove that a taxable person is registered person is entitled to ITC is on the registered person himself. That means if I have claimed a ITC in my return, self-assessed return filed under section 39, the burden would be on me to prove that I was eligible, and for rest of the other things, the burden would be on the department to prove that I have made an incorrect self-assessment. A show cause notice can never be issued that we believe that you have made an incorrect tax rate and you are liable to pay tax at the rate of 18%. No, it is the responsibility of the department to provide the reason, the HSN, the entry, the notification, the POS. And for ITC only, it is the burden on me. But in ITC also, to what extent the burden is on me? Whether I have to prove that I was eligible under section 17 subsection 5 or I was not eligible, the ITC which I have claimed is not blocked under section 17.5, it is satisfying the condition of section 16, whether I have to prove all that also. Honorable Apex Court in case of e-commerce trading company provided that the burden is only for the 6 points, that is proving the supplier, his details of the supplier, the invoice should be there, the payment to supplier should have been made, the transportation should have been done, and the freight should have been paid. That's it. This is the only burden which is required to be proved under section 155. If I am able to prove that, rest of the burden is again on the department to prove that why the ITC was ineligible under section 17 subsection 5 or why I am not eligible under section 16. Section 155 never says that all the eligibility conditions have to be proved, because Section 155 is parameteria to Section 70 of the Karnataka VAT Act, and for that Section 70 of the Karnataka VAT Act, e-commerce trading committee decision was given by the Honorable Apex Court, and that's why whenever we are receiving a notice, that notice has to satisfy the conditions, and I, as an assessee, has the benefit of self-assessment under Section 59, and that is why whenever we are replying, and if the notice is not complete, it is not providing the reasons, the notification, the HSN, the preliminary ground should be that the notice is invalid, it is beyond jurisdiction, because it is the onus on the department to prove that my self-assessment was incorrect. This is part 2. Now coming to part 3. What is an intelligence-based action? Now, this is very important, because in case of an intelligence-based action, both center and state can take the action. But if the action is not an intelligence-based action, only my jurisdiction officer can take the action. So, what Honorable Apex Court said in para number 47, that an action that is predicated on information of tax evasion emanating from the value chain or chain of the transaction rather than from any administrative scrutiny by way of audit of accounts or returns. So, an intelligence-based action can never be based upon a scrutiny of a return or an audit of an accounts. So, anything, let's say there is a difference between a 3B and 2A, which is reflected on the portal, and it can be seen by my jurisdictional officer. And supposedly my jurisdictional officer is in center. Can the state officer, who is not my jurisdictional officer, come and issue a notice or carry out an investigation saying that this is an intelligence-based enforcement action and I am entitled to carry out the assessment? Honorable Apex Court said that an intelligence-based action is an action which is action arising other than from an administrative scrutiny by way of audit of accounts or returns. This is a discrepancy which is visible on the portal, and the officer in the state who is not my jurisdiction officer is well within his power to inform my jurisdiction officer that there is a difference between a 3B and 2A and you have to carry out an action and you issue the notice. This does not require the officer under other jurisdiction to come at my place of business and say that it is an intelligence-based enforcement action, and this is coming from an interpretation of Honorable Apex Court in para 47. Second, whether intelligence-based action would include information procured from the taxpayer through issuance of summons or letters. There is no information available in the department. What they do, they issue a letter seeking some information that you produce certain documents. And when the taxpayer produces those documents, they said that this is an intelligence-based action. Para 48 of Armor Security says that a taxpayer must be mindful that intelligence about invasion of tax cannot be procured from them through issuance of summons or other non-descript letters of correspondence. There has to be certain pre-existing information available with the department that this is evasion of tax or this is an ITC which has been wrongly taken, and this information should be other than by way of administrative scrutiny, by way of audit or accounts or return. So the next question, then how come the intelligence-based action or information be initiated or collected? Para 48 lays down such gathering of intelligence is intended to be a non-intrusive exercise. That means you have not to go and collect from the taxpayer. The department relies on data analytics, validation with the third-party data, or other methods to collect actionable intelligence via analytical tools, human intelligence, modus operandi alerts, as well as information through past detections. So these are the modes from where the information would be collected, and this intelligence would be the action initiated on the basis of this intelligence would be an intelligence-based action. Next is how proceedings would be taken ahead in case of an other than intelligence-based action. So if there's a 3B2A difference and my other officer comes to know what he has to do, any action arising from the audit of accounts or detailed scrutiny of returns must be initiated by the tax administration to which the taxpayer is assigned, para 96 clause 2 of the Supreme Court decision. Clearly, a 3B2A, and it is not an intelligence-based information or an action, and for this, the other part cannot carry out an action against the taxpayer. How proceedings would be taken ahead in case of an intelligence-based action? In contrast, intelligence-based enforcement action can be initiated by any one of the central or state tax administrations, despite the taxpayer having been assigned to other administration. Para 96 clause 3. Question 6. Whether division of taxpayer operates as a bar in case of enforcement action? No. Question 7. Very important observation in para 51. Can scrutiny and audit be conducted by both center and state? Supposedly, I am assigned to center. Can state conduct my audit? Honorable Apex Court said yes. But when? Both central and state tax administration are well empowered to undertake audit of accounts or detailed scrutiny of returns as long as these actions are initiated on the basis of any intelligence related to tax evasion. So therefore, for a taxpayer, if he is not falling under, say, state, he is falling under center. State can also carry out an audit or an scrutiny, but for carrying out an audit or scrutiny, they have to have a pre-existing intelligence-based information on the basis of which that scrutiny or audit is being conducted. So what Honorable Apex Court has said, that not survey, but audit or scrutiny can also be an intelligence-based action. But for that, an intelligence-based information collected through the modes which have been prescribed should have been collected prior to the initiation of action. So this is part 3. Now coming to part 4, that is the scope of issuance of summon in GST. Why the legislature has termed inquiry under section 70? Because Honorable Apex Court said that this is only a step in the course of the entire investigation. It is not a culmination of investigation. A culmination of investigation results in either issuance of a show cause notice or a conclusion of the proceedings. Why summons are issued? That summons are issued by department to obtain information, document, statements. Who can issue a summon? Summons will be issued by to the person under investigation or to a person considered a witness in investigation against another person. So summon can be issued either to the person or the witness in the investigation. When summons shall not be issued? Para 58. That said, summons should not be issued in routine matters or for document readily available on the GST portal. So a summon can never be issued to provide me an audit report if it has been uploaded in GST and 9C because it is available on the portal. Are the guidelines issued by the board, that is 17th August 2022, mandatorily followed? Yes. They have to be mandatorily followed. That has been given in para 60 by the Honorable Apex Court. So if I have been issued a summon beyond the guidelines provided by the board, it is not only violation of the guidelines of the board, but also violation of the decision of the Honorable Apex Court. Because Honorable Apex Court has specifically stated that the summon guidelines which have been issued by the board are binding and they have to be mandatorily followed. Next is, can the department issue a letter for seeking information or issue a letter for advising something? Honorable Apex Court did not provide a definitive answer to this. Although in para 57, they observed that the objective is to collect information, the department has in certain instances advised resorting to a letter to requisition in place of a formal summons. Now the question comes, if I am not replying to those informal letters or advice, can it be said that I am not cooperating with the department? Honorable Allahabad High Court in case of Srikunj Bihari Infracon Limited said that these letters have no statutory backing. And even they asked the department that whether at all there is any provision which says that the assessee has to mandatorily reply to those letters. The department said that there is no such provision in Constitution. Also in Article 73, there is no such provision in neither in the Act or the Constitution wherein the taxpayer is bound to reply to those letters. So whenever a notice is issued which says that since you have not replied to a letter, there was an intent to evade and that's why we are invoking proceedings under Section 74. Just reply that these letters have no statutory backing and it is an option before me whether or not to reply, and I have chosen not to reply, and therefore there is no infringement of any provisions of the statute or any infringement of any provision of the articles of the Constitution based upon which no proceedings under Section 74 be initiated, citing that I have not cooperated with the department. What is the importance of the show cause notice? Now, this is one of the most beautiful part of this judgment. I would not be going through question 1, 2, and 3 because these are something which you all understand. What is the importance of show cause, the fundamental purpose? And now coming to question number 4. Can a show cause notice be vague, and if no, then why? Honorable Apex Court in para 66. A show cause notice sets out the alleged violation of legal provisions and requires the assessee to explain why the duty should not be recovered from them. Thus, a show cause notice cannot be vague, nor can any allegations be made without evidence being commensurate with the gravity of the charges leveled against the noticee. So if the show cause notice is vague, it is not providing any reasons, just make a reference to para 66 of the judgment of the Honorable Apex Court as a preliminary argument. In para 67, Honorable Apex Court observed that the show cause notice sets forth the framework for the proceedings proposed to be undertaken and provides the noticee with an opportunity to submit their explanation before the adjudicating authority. It outlines the background for initiating such proceedings. Therefore, it cannot be vague. Should notice set out all the legal provisions? Yes, para 67 says that the authority issuing the notice must meticulously set out all relevant provisions under which the alleged contraventions are framed. So if I have been issued a notice under section 16(2)(a) that I did not have the invoice, the order cannot be passed under section 16(2)(b) stating that I have not received the goods, because the relevant provision was not invoked, neither the charges was leveled against me in the show cause notice, and that is provided by section 6 by para 67 of the judgment. Can notice be issued without providing all relevant relied upon documents?
If I may intervene,
Yes.
sir, we have question session also, sir. तो हमारे पास already 20 question आ चुके हैं, sir. तो जैसे accordingly आप देख लीजिए. जी.
Yes, yes. So can a notice be issued without providing relied upon documents? No, para 61 says they have to be appended and disclosed to the assessee. Should notice be exhaustive and capable of presenting the case? I have been leveled a charges that your ITC is ineligible in section 17(5). A list of the invoices is provided in the notice. Now I am required to guess why the ITC is ineligible. Para 84 of the judgment says the show cause notice must lay down the foundation of the case. Para 84 again reiterates that the subject matter of the proceeding lies in the contents of the notice, and it ought to be exhaustive so much that it is capable of presenting the case of the revenue in a nutshell. So the notice has to be exhaustive. Can grounds not raised in the notice raised subsequently? Para 85 says no, they cannot be raised subsequently. Now coming to part 7, that whether for the purpose of initiation of proceedings, what is the difference between a summon and issuance of an SCN? Honorable Apex Court in para 58 says that summon is only for inquiry being conducted, wherein department is yet to determine whether proceedings should be initiated. So summons is not an initiation of proceedings, only SCN is there. Can issuance of summon be considered as proceedings? No. Whether search and summon issued in persons of search are distinct proceedings? Yes, but even search is not initiating the proceedings. So what is initiating of proceedings? And what is the intent of the legislature? The intent is when the show cause notice is issued, when the charges are framed, and that's why the charges should be very clear. They cannot be vague. And once SCN has been issued, no parallel proceedings can be initiated. So what does the expression initiating proceeding means? That is when a show cause notice is issued. Now coming to para 8, what is the meaning of the phrase same subject matter? In part 8, wherein there are many discussions given by Honorable Apex Court, but if I have to concise it, in para 88 and 9610 of the judgment, the twofold test which has been laid down by the Honorable Apex Court is, first, the subject matter will be considered the same if the authority has already proceeded on an identical liability of tax or alleged offence by the assessee on the same facts, and if the demand or relief sought is identical. This is the second. So if section 17(5) has been analyzed, that means it has been already been proceeded. If only one dealer has been analyzed for a fake ITC, that does not mean the rest of the dealers have also been analyzed. But if information was sought from me for 10 dealers and only proceeding was initiated for one, that means 9 have been accepted and they have been treated correct. Part 9, what is the scope of same subject matter, that we have already discussed, but in context of logical conclusion. Now, what I have discussed earlier is, supposedly a show cause search was conducted, and after conducting of the search, the department either has to issue a show cause notice, or they inform me of the 10 discrepancies. I deposited all the them and no notice was issued. Can it be said that even if no show cause notice was issued, the matter was concluded for that part and no authority can issue a parallel notice for that? Para 77 of the Supreme Court judgment and para 74 of the Supreme Court judgment clearly provide that the term logical conclusion does not invariably refer to an order of assessment in every case. Rather, it denotes a decision arrived at by the office of the department having regard to the peculiar facts and circumstances of the case. And in para 74, it says, even when a discovery is made during a search proceeding under section 67 of the GST Act, the department is required to bring such proceeding to a definitive conclusion either by issuing a show cause notice under section 74 or by dropping the matter altogether. That means if I have paid or subsequent to my submission, they have dropped it and they have not issued a show cause notice, that means it is also a logical conclusion. And on those matters, no further proceeding can be initiated by any other officer. Part 10, what to do when a similar investigation is being carried out. Let's take an example, which I have already stated. Survey completed by the center. Now audit initiated by state. I am falling under state. I have the conclusion report of the center. I receive a ADT 01. What is the first step which I need to do? I need to make a preliminary reply that this is a conclusion report which was issued. These were the documents which were filed. And therefore, no audit should be conducted on the issues for which already mind has been applied by the other officer. Once this is done, what is the responsibility of the officer who has received those documents? He has to make a communication mandatorily to the officer who conducted the survey and ask him a report that what were the issues which were seen by you. That officer is duty bound to reply to the officer conducting the audit. Once that is done, both have to arrive at a conclusion that these were the matters which were taken care of and these are not taken care of, and the assessee should then be given an opportunity that this is the conclusion we have reached. Once the assessee receives the conclusion, if he wants to challenge it, he can challenge it before the Jurisdictional High Court, citing as a lack of jurisdiction, because Honorable Apex Court has clearly laid down that whatever has been assessed cannot be assessed again. Supposedly, even after giving a letter, the authority carries on the audit. What is the option available for the taxpayer? He can approach the Jurisdictional High Court, citing that the proceedings are invalid in view of the judgment given by the Honorable Apex Court. So this is the process. And merely by sitting and not giving the information, that would not do, because Honorable Apex Court has clearly stated that if two inquiries are being conducted simultaneously, the assessee has to cooperate, and the best he can do is to inform both of them that this is the proceedings or inquiry which is being conducted. Let both of them decide who has the authority, and if they are not able to decide, the assessee can approach the jurisdictional high court, or if they decide and if the assessee is not agreed to them, he can still approach the jurisdictional high court. But merely by sitting on the notice being received and not cooperating with the department would not be sufficient compliance of the guidelines which have been laid down by the Honorable Apex Court. So this was all about the jurisdiction which can be acquired in parallel proceedings, what is the jurisdictional fact, how it can be assessed, how it can be challenged, and how it can be seen from the perspective of a taxpayer. So with this, I would conclude my today's session, and thank you again to the organizers and AIFTP and my friend Rajendra Roda ji and Chavi ji and all the office bearer Ashish ji for giving me this opportunity. And I will always love to come on the platform AIFTP. Thank you very much, and I would be open to the questions which have been raised in the question box.
Wonderful presentation by Arpit ji. Thank you. Thank you. Wonderful
Thank you
presentation.
so much, Arpit. I've already heard you many times.
Mhm.
This is the nth time probably I'm hearing you. But every time there is always a takeaway which we all have in your sessions. And you've also made us more clear that the technical strength is the shield for GST litigations, and jurisdictional issues are the swords. And you have sharpened both today. Before we move ahead for the question answers, I request the convener, Sri Rajendra Orera ji, for his closing remarks on the wonderful session that was conducted.
Certainly, Chavi ji. It is certainly indeed wonderful session. I was glued with the my system throughout the session without even switching off my video, because the moment you switch off your video, you tend to divert your attention with other matters on the table. So that is why I was not able, I did not want to. Sir, words are short, but one thing, sir, PPT demand has already been popped up. So many from many participants. Kindly
I have
share the
shared
PPT.
it with you. I shared it with you already
Thank you,
on your
sir.
WhatsApp.
Another, sir, my personal views that I have heard you and read you at various times. Especially, sir, मुझे ऐसा लगता है. Otherwise, also the subject is into your veins. बट पेनल्टी जो है वो आपका, मुझे लगता है सर, फेवरेट सेक्शन है, फेवरेट पार्ट है. आपने मेंस रिया और इन सबको बहुत लिंक किया है आर्ट कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन के साथ. उसको कि फॉर सेम ऑफेंस टू पेनल्टीज और ये सब, डबल ज्यूपर्डी और ये सब आपने बहुत क्लोजली लिंक किया उसको. आज भी मैंने देखा सर 122 के आपने परखच्चे उड़ा दिए हैं. और सर एक बात मैं बता दूं अर्पित जी, डिपार्टमेंट इज आल्सो वाचिंग इन दिस वेबिनार. बहुत सारे डिपार्टमेंटल ऑफिसर्स जो है ऑलरेडी सुन रहे हैं. तो आपने बहुत सारी प्रॉपर ऑफिसर्स की जो डेफिशिएंसीज निकाल दी है, तो सरकार तक जल्दी पहुंच जाएगी. तो सर, जुरिसडिक्शनल फैक्ट आपने शुरुआत से जो समझाया, फिर आपने सेट की टोन, फिर आपने हर एस्पेक्ट रजिस्ट्रेशन से लेकर आपने इवन लेट फी इन सब के बारे में बात की बहुत ही बढ़िया तरीके से. मैं सर एक दो चीज़ें, जैसे एक तो मैंने आपका टू सर्कुलर 254 पे आपका व्यू सुनना चाहा था, लेकिन आपने बीच में बोल दिया. पहले मैंने क्वेश्चन लिखा था, फिर आपने वो बोल दिया कि मेरा व्यू क्या है, कि वो 27 अक्टूबर 2025 से पहले जो भी नोटिसेस हैं, वो आपने पूरा एग्जैक्टली नहीं बोला, लेकिन मैं समझ गया था आपकी भावना से कि आप कहना चाहते हैं कि वो इनवैलिड है, क्वेश्चनेबल है, उन पर हम चैलेंज कर सकते हैं. साथ ही साथ आपने 122 को जिस तरह से रीड किया सर, सर मेरा एक ऑब्जर्वेशन भी है, आप जब क्वेश्चन आंसर करें तो आप जवाब दे दीजिएगा, कि 122 में जैसे आपने कहा कि पीओ नहीं है, टाइम लिमिट नहीं है. और सर एक और बात, की पेनल्टी इंपोज करने से पहले तो शो कॉज अपॉर्चुनिटी ऑफ बीइंग हर्ड, प्रिंसिपल ऑफ नेचुरल जस्टिस तो होना चाहिए. और अगर सिर्फ 122 की पेनल्टी, मैं सारी डेफिशिएंसीज को क्योर कर देता हूं, मैं एक्सेप्ट कर लेता हूं, पीओ भी मान जाता हूं, टाइम भी मान जाता हूं, तो प्रिंसिपल ऑफ नेचुरल जस्टिस, शो कॉज नोटिस कहाँ है? तो मेरा एक ऑब्जर्वेशन डे वन से इस लॉ पे, इस पे है सर. पतंजलि में इस बात को उन्होंने रेज नहीं किया। पतंजलि में वो बात रेज की जो आपने बताई। इसमें सर अगर 127 को हम पढ़ें, 127 में लिखा है जहां पर 73, 74, 63 वाली वो पेनल्टी नहीं लगा पाया, तो 127 में पीओ जो है पेनल्टी लगा सकता है। तो मुझे ऐसा लगता है सर अगर 122 में पेनल्टी लगानी है तो 122 में तो कुछ हो ही नहीं सकता। आपको या तो 73, 74 से लिंक करना पड़ेगा उसे, या अगर इंडिपेंडेंटली 122 करना है तो आपको 127 से। आप अपना व्यू सर Q&A में देना, मैं आपको डिस्टर्ब बीच में नहीं कर रहा। एक बात और सर मैं मेंबर्स के बिहाफ पे आपसे चाहूंगा कि आप बताएं, बर्डन ऑफ प्रूफ के बारे में आपने जरूर बताया। 155 को बहुत सुंदर ई कॉम कॉफी गिल से भी लिंक कर दिया सर आपने। एक्सेप्ट बर्डन ऑफ प्रूफ, एक्सेप्ट 155 ऑफ आईटीसी, आपकी ऑब्जर्वेशन ये है इसका मतलब कि बाकी सारा बर्डन ऑफ प्रूफ जो है वो उसके ऊपर है जो अलेज करता है, और ये हमारा भारतीय साक्ष्य अधिनियम भी, इंडियन एविडेंस एक्ट भी कहता है। इस पर भी 2 मिनट आप अगर जरूर बोल दीजिएगा सर। आर्मर सिक्योरिटीज को सर जिस तरह से आपने डाइसेक्ट किया है, इस तरह से तो अभी तक मैंने भी नहीं पढ़ा था इसको 10 हिस्सों में डिवाइड करके। अब मैं दोबारा सोच रहा हूँ कि आर्मर सिक्योरिटीज डाउनलोड करके या सिस्टम से निकाल के दोबारा पढ़ूंगा। एंड इट इज सो ब्यूटिफुली सर आपने बहुत अच्छे से एक्सप्लेन किया। सर ओवरऑल मैं समझता हूं कि जो मैं सभी पार्टिसिपेंट्स को एक रिक्वेस्ट करूंगा, ये पीपीटी भी मिल जाएगी और वीडियो रिकॉर्डेड लेक्चर भी मिल जाएगा हमारे अर्पित जी का हमारे फेडरेशन के यूट्यूब चैनल पे मिल जाएगा आपको। लिंक हम सब फॉरवर्ड कर देंगे, हमारे अनुज जी फॉरवर्ड कर देंगे, हमारे बाकी सारे लोग। आप जरूर एक बारी अर्पित जी के इस पूरे डिस्कशन को, डेलिब्रेशन को दोबारा सुनिए। पीपीटी सामने है आपके। मैं आपको एक बात एश्योर करता हूं कि जब भी कोई नोटिस, कोई डॉक्यूमेंट, कोई भी इंफॉर्मेशन आपके सामने आती है मित्रों, आप उसको इमीडिएटली मेरिट पर जवाब देने से पहले उसकी टेक्निकलिटीज को जरूर टेस्ट करें सर। हमारे ऑफिस में भी हम 90% केस जो है केवल टेक्निकलिटीज पर ही जीत जाते हैं, हम पॉजिटिव रिजल्ट ले आते हैं। इसलिए आप सबसे भी विनती है, क्योंकि अब तो कानून जो है वो धीरे धीरे मैच्योर हो रहा है, अपना अपना एक्चुअल शेप ले रहा है, जूरिस्प्रूडेंस भी डेवलप हो रहा है। इवन डिपार्टमेंट इज आल्सो करेक्टिंग। सर्कुलर 254 जो है वो 8 साल बाद वो लेकर आए और बताया कि पीओ ही नहीं है हमारे पास अभी 122 में और 125 में। 125 में तो सर अभी भी सर्कुलर 254 ने नहीं बोला ना,
नहीं।
सिर्फ 122 में बोला है। 125 में तो अभी भी नहीं बोला कि पीओ कौन है। चलिए, तो मैं ज्यादा और समय नहीं लूंगा। मैं चाहूंगा कि क्वेश्चन आंसर सेशन अर्पित सर
राजेंद्र, there are
एड्रेस
29
करें।
questions in the question answers
हाँ हाँ
tab.
सर, मैं
तो
समझ
इसको
गया हूँ,
क्विकली और
देखिए।
समराइज करके, क्विकली सर अर्पित सर रिक्वेस्ट है, इसको क्विकली करके एक बार समराइज करके हम
हाँ
रिप्लाई कर देंगे फिर।
Yes,
तो
sir.
अब
राजेंद्र, हु इज
अर्पित
टेकिंग
जी
अप द
अपने
क्वेश्चंस?
समय से रिप्लाई करें, कोई दिक्कत नहीं है सर,
Yogesh
मेरी
ji had
विनती
to
है।
take up the
मैं
question.
क्विकली रैप अप कर रहा हूँ सर अपनी बात को। और थैंक यू वेरी मच। और अभी हम साथ हैं। देखिए अर्पित जी, अभी भी लगभग 250 लोग, 175 अराउंड पीपल आर
That's the
हेयर
magical
लिसनिंग
figure
टू
of
यू।
250 today in today's webinar.
हाँ, अराउंड 250 वी रीच टू दी। एंड जी, तो बहुत अच्छा है सर, आपका आपका जादू है। मैंने तो पहली बार शुरुआत में ही बोल दिया था, दिस इज योर मैजिक विच विच स्पेल्स एवरी टाइम सर। थैंक यू वेरी
एग्जैक्टली।
मच। नाउ ओवर टू
थैंक यू।
छवि
Now
जी।
let us move on to the section which is a signal of engagement. So we have 20, 30 odd questions here. Yogesh Harjai ji had to take up the question answers. Is he here?
Yogesh is here.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
Okay,
he is
sir,
here. He
over
is
to
here.
you,
Yogesh
sir.
is here.
Let us quickly go through the questions here in the chat
Yeah.
box.
Yes, thank you, ma'am. Arpit, sir, first question is Section 74 notice was issued after audit proceedings on the ground that that short payment would not have been revealed except in case of
Identified.
audit. Yeah. So how do you respond to such charges?
Yeah, as you all know that audit is not a intrusion proceedings. It is only a regular proceedings, and whatever has been taken out during the course of audit, it is only from my books of account. See, I would divide it into two parts. First is, let's say, of tax not paid. Supposedly, I have shown a supply and on that supply, I have shown a tax of 5%, and department says it is liable to tax say at the rate of 18%, and it is an interpretational matter. So, in my opinion, Section 74 can never be invoked. But supposedly, take another example that while conducting an audit, department comes to know an invoice issued in B2C wherein tax was collected at a rate of 18%, but it was shown at the rate of 5%. Then yes, it is falling under Section 74. So we will to divide it into two parts: how and what was the reason of coming to the notice. So in the first case, in my opinion, there can never be 74. But in second case, yes, because if the record would not have been checked and this would not have been identified that tax is being collected at 18%, individually reflected at 5%, that in my opinion would 74 or 76, whatever might be the case, it would be applicable.
So next is Section 73 notice was issued on the basis of difference between 3B and 2A by state GST, and where the administrative jurisdiction is with central GST, especially when central GST has already conducted the audit. So how far the action of state GST is valid?
My opinion, again, once the audit has been completed, entire records were provided, and 3B and 2A is one thing which is invariably checked during the course of audit. So if that has been completed and nothing else, if the audit was incorrect, because that audit is being approved by the commissioner audit, it is not an audit which is being approved by someone else. It is being approved by the commissioner audit, and if at all they can do that, in that also I have a reservation. If at all they can do, they can only initiate a proceeding under Section 108. But a contemporary officer initiating under Section 73 for 3B2A when audit has already been conducted, in my opinion, it cannot be done, because the matter has been put to a logical conclusion. This is something which is there on the portal. This is something which should have been done in the audit. And as I always say, if I have provided all the books of accounts and only 10 observations have been identified and none have been mentioned, it does not mean that only 10 things have been checked. It means all the other things were checked and they were found correct. If it is not so, then the burden is on the department to say that we had not checked it, and they have to prove that why they did not check.
Sir, one of the commissionerate has issued circular for proper officer, but they did not provide any monetary value. So is that circular valid for proper officer without monetary value?
Sir, again, the providing a monetary limit is the prerogative of the government, and we cannot challenge it. See, what is the rationale of providing a monetary limit? There is a superintendent, there is the assistant commissioner, there is an additional commissioner or commissioner. In my opinion, not to challenge anybody's intelligence or authority, it is treated that as you go higher, the better mind is applied and it is seen in a better manner. So that's why government, to safeguard themselves, not to challenge anyone, to safeguard themselves, give the higher monetary limit matters to a higher ranking officer. That is also done in an office also. Larger matters are seen by the senior partner, the smaller matters are seen by the managing partner, and so on like this. So when the government itself has deemed that this is the monetary limit we have to exercise, they are free to do. If they are ready to see that a lower level officer can pass an order of 500 crore rupees, they are ready to, it means that they are ready with the fact, they are acceptable to the fact, and it is upon them. So in my opinion, we cannot challenge that there is no monetary limit given in the circular.
And jurisdictional validity of notice issued by Deputy Director of GGTI. I guess they have pan-India jurisdiction.
They have clarified it. So, and multiple high courts have approved it.
Then cross empowerment of jurisdiction by state and central for inspection.
Yes, inspection is another important aspect when we read through Section 67, subsection 1. See, let's take an example that on an interpretation-based issue, there is an inspection under Section 67(1). Can there be an inspection under Section 67, subsection 1 on an interpretation-based issue, wherein supposedly a matter is already pending in another matter before the High Court? In my opinion, if we go read through Section 67(1), there is an intent to evade imbibed in 67(1), and without proving that intent to evade, without it being brought on record in INS 01. Any proceeding being, any investigation being carried out in 67(1) has to be challenged whenever initial reply is being made as a preliminary objection, because lawmakers were very apprehensive, and that's why they included intent to evade in language of 67(1), just like section 74. And in cases wherein there are interpretational issues, we as a practice are making it as a preliminary ground.
The next is whether in the absence of any specific delegation, specific delegation of power under relevant rule, mayor's delegation under the substantive provisions of the Act is sufficient to confer jurisdiction upon the officer to carry on the proceedings. There is no delegation under rules, but only under the Act. That's what I guess you want to say.
So in that case, if the delegation has been made to a person or a government or an officer, see, how I would read it, that supposedly Act has delegated some power to some person. Now, since Act has delegated, he is the empowered officer, but he cannot further delegate his power to any other person. So, in my opinion, if the statute has delegated in a clear manner, then that officer can exercise the power, but he cannot further delegate it.
Can interest under Section 50 be recovered by issuing intimation in form DRC 1D?
See, interest under Section 50, again, we have to see that 7512 is there for self-assessed liability. But again, there is a judgment of Honorable Calcutta High Court wherein they have said that 7512 has to be seen wherein the tax is also pending, and then only 7512 can be issued. But if tax has been paid, then merely it cannot be issued for interest. So that is again a matter for challenge, that how 7512 has to be understood and how recovery has to be made. And there are multiple decisions wherein they have said that interest under Section 50 is not something which can be decided without adjudication. And that is why when we go through the portal, it is only assessing cash liability. It is not assessing delayed reporting, because they themselves treat it as part of adjudication. So therefore, whenever there is an interest on delayed reporting, it cannot be covered merely by way of issuing a intimation on recovery directly under Section 79. And if that is being done, then we have to challenge the wires of the action. And in all the cases wherein 7512 recovery was issued by the department for interest, we have challenged it that the 7512 is not the appropriate section, because the tax liability is already been paid, and if at all it was there, tax should be still be pending.
Next is, I think that is rather a practical case study. Assessee is unregistered person, officer issued show cause notice in ASMT 14 under Section 63. He determined tax under Section 73, interest under Section 50, penalty under Section 122. Whether penalty under Section 122 can be dropped at the discretion of officer, reasonable cause which can be explained, is taxable receipts of 19 lakhs. He's practically given his entire case study. I guess, sir, there is something one-on-one to be taken. I don't think this can be taken here. How can the penalty be dropped? That is practical.
What I have seen is 19 lakh and 2 lakh rupees, and if the aggregate turnover is costing 20 lakh rupees, then registration was there. For 122 can be challenged. That 122, see, again 122, there are two aspects. First is the aspect wherein the relevant condition for levying penalty has to be seen, and second is the quantification. And whenever we are seeing the relevant condition on the basis of which penalty is to be levied, another thing which you have to see, whether there is an intent to evade imbibed in the condition or there is no intent to evade. So supposedly the condition says that where the taxpayer has failed to obtain the registration. Now, there is no intent to evade. The only condition which is to be proved is whether the registration was liable to be taken or not. If yes, then the offense has been committed. Second is the quantification part, wherein the penalty is 10,000 rupees or tax evaded. So when I go to the quantification part, the term evaded is there, which means the intent to evade has to be proved. So if there is no intent to evade, then maximum penalty which can be levied is 10,000 rupees. And if the intent to evade is there, then the equal to tax evaded has to be proved. So again, we have to see on a case-to-case basis, but this is a principle which can be generally applied for 122.
Whether wrong availment of ITC as per Section 17(5) can be ground for cross-empowerment action.
See, again, wrong availment of ITC under Section 75, it's a very broad question. again, how it was seen, whether it was an intelligence-based action, whether it was an action based upon the records or scrutiny. Again, it's a very general question, and we have to see in the guidelines laid down by the Honorable Apex Court in Armor Security for cross-empowerment.
Can a show cause notice be issued only under section 122 when provision gives no authority to issue one?
I think we have covered it there, 122, how it has to be analyzed.
Is enforcement case covered under intelligence-based information criteria?
See, again, there is no definition of enforcement case. What is this? That anti-evasion can only come under section 67. And whenever they are coming under 67, they are either center or they are state. Again, if they are coming under 67, whether center or state, and if they, for say, I am falling under center, then for 67(1), they have to prove that the conditions provided under 67 was fulfilled. They don't have to prove that it is an intelligence-based action. But when the other counterpart is coming under say from state, they not only have to prove that it is an action falling under section 67(1), but they also have to prove that it is an intelligence-based action. So this is how I would see the cross-empowerment in case of section 67.
Where statutory appeal is barred by time, can writ jurisdiction be invoked to question the violation of natural justice or jurisdictional error at the adjudication stage?
See, there are many decisions now in GST regime wherein the question of violation of natural justice and jurisdictional error can be challenged, but now high courts are also not giving a blank extension. They are saying that what was the issue. Just recently, I was reading a judgment wherein the assessee approached the Jurisdictional High Court on limitation. And High Court said that since you participated in the proceedings, so you cannot say that you are not aware of the order being passed. Once you have participated, that means you are knowing the proceedings which are continuation. And once they are continued, you have to be aware that the order would be passed at some time, and you have to be aware of when the order is passed. Simultaneously, if I see it from another angle, that my personal hearing was conducted in say April 2022, but since the matter was pertaining to 21-22, the officer passed the order in 2026. Then I can say that the officer has taken his sweet 4 years time to pass the order. So it cannot be said that I would be always going on the portal regularly to check. So again, we have to see on a case-to-case basis. And there is one very important judgment of Bambino by Honorable Allahabad High Court, wherein they have discussed what is the meaning and scope of communication of the order. So the participants may read through that judgment. See, what I always say that Patanjali is not a case which we should ignore since it is not favoring the taxpayer. It should be read because how the arguments were made by the learned senior counsel in that matter. And whatever the discussion which we are making in this in the course of this session, it is not only for the taxpayer but also the officers also, that what is the precaution they need to take for the proceedings not being hit by the limitation. Because it is incumbent both on the taxpayer and the officer to follow the procedure. See, if the taxpayer was not aware of the fact and he was not vigilant enough to file a Tran 1 by 27th of December 2017, and even if he was delayed by even 1 day, he had to wait for 5 entire years to file Tran 1. Why? Because there was a procedural lapse. So being an officer or the taxpayer, we are only either side of the coin. We are two equal stakeholders. So law equally applies, and whatever we are discussing, whether it is on the jurisdictional aspect or the limitation, it equally applies to the taxpayer and the department also.
Information was communicated by one state jurisdictional authority to another jurisdictional officer regarding availment of fake ITC, where the taxpayer is administratively assigned to central jurisdiction authority. In such a scenario, can the receiving authority, which is the state authority, can initiate proceeding against the taxpayer? Further, would this be qualified as intelligence-based information?
This is in my opinion intelligence-based action. But again, if I've received an intimation from another person that this is a fake authority which is not there, and this is the person and taxpayer falling under your jurisdiction has either purchased the goods or supplied the goods to that person. So therefore, you are requested to verify and take action. See, whenever an alert circular is received, it never says that you have to mandatorily take an action. It always says that you have to verify, and that's why there are multiple judgments in GST wherein they have said that if the officer has blindly relied upon the intimation being received in alert circular, it is a borrowed satisfaction. It is not the satisfaction of the officer. Because when we read through section 73, 74, it says where it appears to the proper officer. That means whatever action I am taking as an officer, it should appear to me. It is not said where it appears to the proper officer or any alert circular is being received from another officer that notice has to be issued. So even if I have received an alert circular, it should appear to me that tax was not paid or short paid or ITC was wrongly availed or utilized. In one of our case, just to cite an example, for this example, a alert circular was issued for X, that X is non-existent, and all the suppliers who have supplied the goods to X should also be assessed accordingly. So notices were issued to Y for supplying goods to X, and thereafter notices were issued to Z that you have supplied goods to Y, and in turn Y has supplied goods to Z, which is non-existent. So why not your entire supply be leviable to penalty under section 122 clause 1 subclause 2? When the notice was issued and we were to reply, we saw that the registration was X was still active. So the first ground is that my officer who has received the alert circular has to apply his mind, it should appear. And if the registration of X is still active, he is filing his return, then how can it be said that I supplied the goods to Y and in turn Y supplied goods to Z and Z is non-existent? So that means the mind has not been applied, it has only been issued on the basis of alert circular. So that is how we should understand the alert circular, and in my opinion, it falls in intelligence-based action.
The taxpayer has availed ITC without any actual invoices and had also issued invoice without any actual supply. The penalty will be under section 122(1) clause 2 or clause 7, or maybe both.
See, this is again a very detailed topic, so I would not be going into detail, but in my opinion, penalty would be leviable both under 122(1)(2) for issuing the invoice without the supply of goods, and 122(1)(7), although the circular says, and part of it is correct also, because 122(1)(7) takes or utilizes ITC. So although the circular says that when the underlying goods have not been supplied and only invoice is issued, it is not a supply under section 7, and therefore only penalty would be leviable under 122(1)(2. No tax recovery would be made under section 74. But at the same time, 122(1)(7) says taking of an ITC is also offense for which was not available. Utilizing is not an offense because I am not utilizing it against a taxable supply. But taking of an ITC is an offense. So 122(1)(7), yes, it can be applied, although it has to be seen that whether at all courts holds or not. But yes, I would not say that it is completely out of the scenario. Prima facie equal case lies for the taxpayer in the revenue.
Whether late fee can be levied for invoking section 47(2) read with section 74 when late fee is in order for the period 2017 to 2022, but DRC 7 is issued only for composite period of 2018-19.
See, again, what we have discussed is 74 cannot be invoked. So the primary argument would be regarding 74 and 47. Secondly, if the DRC 07 is only for 18-19, in my opinion, this is something which is covered by 160 and says that this is not an error which would vitiate the proceedings, the validity of the proceeding, merit of the proceeding. Yes, recovery in the 47-74 would do, but merely referring an incorrect year in DRC 07 wherein the detailed order was clear for the period 17 to 22, in my opinion, it would not do. And yes, it can be raised a ground, but then again, what we have discussed, that court at best would remand it back rather than quashing the proceedings. Yes, if the order itself is of 18-19, but it is speaking about 18-19, but it is recovering for 17 to 22, then yeah, it is a case of invalid order. But merely an incorrect year on DRC 07 would not be sufficient enough.
Tax of March 2023 was paid in cash while filing 3B of June 2023. Notice under section 73 and thereafter order in original was issued for interest and 10% penalty on the tax amount. Is this correct order by CGST department?
See, again, tax of March was already paid while filing 3B of June 2023 and notice was issued under section 73. Now the question is whether it is a self-assessed liability or not. because if it is treated as self-assessed liability, then 7311 would be applicable, and merely issuance of the notice would be sufficient enough for levying of penalty. If it is not a self-assessed liability, then recovery would have to be made under 73(9), and payment can be made within 30 days of the issuance of the show cause notice. Alternatively, argument can be taken that this is covered under section 7512. And since it is covered under section 7512, so why the recovery was not made directly under the provision 7512, and the applicable rule by issuing a letter, issuing an intimation and giving a 7 days time period. So because if that would have done, I would have paid the interest and there would have been no levy of penalty. So again, what I would say that courts are not yet decided on 73(9), 73(11) or 75(12). It is yet to be decided how we put forward our argument. This has to be indulged on a case-to-case basis, because in my opinion, 73(9), 11 and 75(12), yes, the intent was to apply on different situations. Yes, the clarity would be levied, would be given subsequently, but presently there is no clarity, so we can take argument to the in a manner which suits our case at present.
Can a composite SCN under section 122 be issued for multiple years, considering there is no limitation period for section 122 like section 73 and 74?
Composite SCN, the jury is already out. Multiple high courts have said that it is invalid, and some high courts have said invalid. Matter would be reaching to the Honorable Apex Court, and once they would be giving it, then only clarity would be given. And somewhere down the line, what I feel is that if at all Honorable Apex Court lays down that multiple notice cannot be issued for multiple years, somewhere down the line we are seeking another section 148 of Income Tax Act in GST also, wherein article 142 would be coming to the rescue and the matters would be regularized. This is the best I can see what would happen, because striking down the merit only on the multiple years issue, yes, it is a possibility, but the balance of favor lies in the revenue, even if it is held unconstitutional or beyond the statute.
Sorry, Yogesh. With the due permission of the chair, I think let's take the last question for today. We are 25 minutes past already. Are Yogesh ji, we are left
एक
with any
मिनट छवि जी,
questions?
एक मिनट छवि जी, एक मिनट
जी,
सर
जी.
बैठे हैं हमारे साथ अभी, मैक्सिमम जितने क्वेश्चंस हो सके ले लेते हैं हम, है ना?
Okay.
आई रिक्वेस्ट कि मेंबर्स आर
Yogesh, how many questions are left now?
हाँ, ज्यादा क्वेश्चन
2-3 questions are left. That's
If
it.
last
2-3
2-3 questions are left, then take it quickly. Let's
हाँ,
move
ले लो योगेश जी, ले लो प्लीज.
The order is passed by Joint Commissioner where show cause notice was issued by Additional Commissioner. Is this legally sustainable and within jurisdiction?
It happens many a times wherein ADT 02 is being signed by many times it is always signed by the assistant commissioner, but if the amount involved is less than say 10 lakh rupees, then the adjudication takes place by the superintendent. In one of the matters, it has been challenged. I've come across the matter, and it has said that once a higher authority has issued a show cause notice, how can a lower authority go past the decision and hold it unconstitutional, hold it incorrect? Practically, we see that once a notice has been issued by a higher authority, rarely the lower authority quashes it and holds it in favor of a taxpayer. But yes, it has been challenged, and if it is done, we should make it part of our submission. What happens? See, sometimes I see that what happens subsequently is held in future, because no one knew that issuing a notice for multiple years or 168A extension of time limit would be challenged in such a manner, but ultimately courts have held in favor of taxpayers. So if somewhere down the line we see that this is something incorrect, we can make it part of the amount, let the courts decide it, rather than judging it at our part that whether it is correct or not.
Taxpayer is under central jurisdiction but wishes to file an appeal against order of state mobile wing. Where to file this appeal before central or state order is not appearing on the portal?
See, again, if it is if it has been passed by the state officer, then the appeal would be going to the state jurisdiction of the officer who had passed the order. If it has been passed by the central officer, it would be going to the central office, appeal authority.
The Deputy Commissioner has filed appeal against GST order passed by Superintendent in favor of SSC, and the appellate authority has issued notice for personal hearing. Kindly share your views whether SSC can ask for grounds on which basis a department has filed the appeal to submit additional documents. Can SSC ask for relied upon documents and cross-examination during personal hearings? Any precautions, safeguards to be taken by the SSC while appearing before personal hearing?
See, when the department has filed an appeal, it is always the right of an assessee to have the copy of the ground which have been raised by the department. It is similar to how I appeal, I file an appeal and copy is forwarded to the department. So, as a assessee, I have all the rights to ask for the copy of the appeal and the grounds on the basis of department has filed an appeal. And once the appeal has been filed, then I have the right to challenge those grounds. So supposedly the matter was in my favor and the department has challenged it on certain grounds. So I can file my written submission and whatever evidences I have to file. Second is, can the assessee ask for relied upon document cross-examination during personal hearing, which was specifically requested time of adjudication proceedings, but not provided? Again, see, what is happening is, what I could understand is that the notice was issued at the time of certain statements were relied upon, but at that time cross-examination was not sought, but reply was made, and on the basis of that reply, the order was passed in the favor of the taxpayer. And since the order was passed in the favor of taxpayer, the assessee did not file a appeal against that order. And now the department has filed an appeal stating that the order was incorrectly passed on. And now can I ask for a cross-examination or a personal hearing, which I did not ask initially, but now I am asking because the department has challenged the very ground on the basis of which the order has been passed in my favor. In my opinion, see, again, there would be different opinions on this issue, wherein one would say that since you have not challenged it before the officer and you have not asked for the cross-examination, so why you are asking it at a subsequent forum when the matter has been decided? And since department cannot produce any additional evidence during the course of proceedings while filing an appeal, how the assessee on the similar ground be allowed to provide additional evidence or ask something which was not done during the course of proceeding? And this has to be seen under the purview of Rule 112 of CGST rules, which provides for additional evidence and additional opportunity. So in case I am asking for cross-examination or something which was not asked against an appeal which has been filed by the department, if I go by Rule 112, I would have to provide that what were the circumstances in which I was not allowed to raise the matter, or I asked it, but the department did not provide it. The appellate authority can invoke Rule 112 and say that since it was not asked by you, so what prevented you? And since on the basis of evidences which were available, it was given in your favor, so I would not allow any further fresh additional evidence to be produced by way of a cross-examination. So in my opinion, whatever we are doing at the time of adjudication, it has to be done because it is the foundation of the proceedings. And I would not say that what I am saying is correct, but yes, it would be a challenge to seek a cross-examination subsequently at the time of appeal in case it was not sought at the time of initial hearing. Any precaution or safeguard? See, precaution or safeguard is the only thing that since I am not allowed to raise a fresh ground or an additional evidence, so whatever department has filed as an appeal, they would also be restricted to the evidences which are available on record, and they cannot produce any evidence while filing an appeal which was not submitted or which was not present at the time of passing of the order before the adjudicating officer.
One last question, sir. Is it mandatory to issue one within 60 days or it can go beyond this time limit?
See, again, there are differing judgments of high courts on this aspect, wherein, as far as I remember, two judgments have said that this is a mandatory time limit, and one has said that this is not a mandatory time limit. So, I would always go in the situation for which I am arguing, and wherein the majority of the high courts have said that this is a mandatory time limit, and I would stick to it because ultimately there is a 60-day time limit. The department, on the contrary, says that even if we have not processed it within 60 days, ultimately we are giving you interest for the loss of the money time value which is there. If there would have been no interest being given, then it should have been a mandatory time limit. But again, see what is happening in GST, nothing is finalized until it is reaching to the Supreme Court. So we have to be aware of the judgment which are being passed on and which judgments to rely upon, not and which judgment not to rely upon. And even if we are not relying upon certain judgments, what we have to say whenever the counterparty raises those judgments.
Are they really giving interest also? They are not giving interest even beyond, if they're passing out beyond 2 months, then also they are not giving any interest. So
Again, we have to ask for it.
we have
हमने
to
बहुत
ask for
सारे
it.
केसेस में रिफंड लिया है सर। योगेश जी बोलिए।
लेने तो ले सकते हो, but you
ब्याज
will
के
have
साथ,
a
ब्याज
bad
के
relation
साथ,
with the department in that case. You will have
ब्याज
bad
के
relation
साथ।
with the department in that case, because it comes personally on the officer in that case.
Why to have a good relationship with the department? It should be a arm's
We
length
need to
relationship
maintain
with
the
each person.
balance, whether mandatory or directory, but we need to maintain the balance with the department. So that is the thing. Chalo, thanks.
Thank
Chavi,
you.
please take it
Thank
forward,
you
Chavi,
so
सर
much,
please.
क्वेश्चन
sir.
खत्म हो गए योगेश जी?
हाँ
And
सर,
I
क्वेश्चन खत्म हो गए
realized
सर।
ओके 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 ओके
there
वंडरफुल।
were questions which were put in till 7:24 since we were there live. So there were people who were still posting the questions. And thank
अभी
you
एक
so much,
क्वेश्चन
Arpit ji,
एक
for
क्वेश्चन मेरे
such.
पास आया। छवि जी एक सेकंड रुकिए। ये मनोज जी हैं हमारे पास सेक्रेटरी टू द नॉर्दर्न जोन। ये पूछ रहे हैं सर कि अगर डीसी ने अपने ही ऑफिसर के खिलाफ अपील फाइल की है तो क्या हम उसको कह सकते हैं कि आप उसके खिलाफ जो है एक्शन भी लीजिए, डिसिप्लिनरी एक्शन लीजिए?
No, no.
This is something, देखिए इंटरप्रिटेशन के मैटर्स होते हैं, अनलेस अंटिल मेलाफाइड इज प्रूव्ड। सो और डीसी ने जो अपील फाइल करी है, इट इज ओनली ऑलवेज ऑन द इंस्ट्रक्शन ऑफ कमिश्नर अंडर सेक्शन 1072। सो इट इज नॉट अ डिसीजन ऑफ एन इंडिविजुअल ऑफिसर, बट अ ऑफिसर हु इज हायर इन द रैंक एंड वेस्टेड विद द पावर टू डिसाइड।
ठीक है जी।
And one thing, one question which Rajendra ji had raised, that 122 and 127, concluding with that question, because that was one question which was asked by Rajendra ji. Sir, when I initially raised this question that 122 does not have a reference to proper officer, one counter argument which I received was that 127 is applicable and 127 read with 122 notice has to be given. I then said that if 122 has to be read with 127, then rule 142(1) would not have referred 122 and 127 in the same breath. They would have only referred 127. They would have not have referred 122 and 125 therein. And therefore, subsequently, when in circular number 254, now they have specifically inserted 122, even though there was 127. So that means they themselves read that 122 has to be invoked independently. It has not to be read with 127. Then the next question comes that what is the scope of 127? That is also something I'm not able to understand, that 127, when it finds an independent mention in one rule 142, what is the penalty they are trying to levy under 127, wherein it is not quantifying anything. So the subsequent act of the government and the framing of the rules by the government indicate that 122 and 127 are separate.
इसका मतलब तो सर 122 कभी भी इन्वोक नहीं हो सकता।
मतलब तो पता नहीं हो तो कोर्ट बताएंगे, हम तो डिस्कशन प्लेटफॉर्म पे है जो हम कर रहे हैं।
ये तो मैंने एक वाया मीडिया सोचा था कि 127 से 122 इन्वोक हो सकता है, लेकिन आप कह रहे हैं जी वो तो बिल्कुल ठीक कह रहे हैं। मैं वही भी एक में रिकॉल कर रहा था कि 142 में 122 127 सेपरेटली लिख के।
और अब सर्कल नंबर 254 भी है।
254 भी है जहां पर 125 127 की बात ही नहीं की गई है।
नहीं, पर 3/3/2017 में 127 पहले से है।
तो 127 और 122 अलग हो गया।
हेलो,
वो आपस में कॉइन जॉइंट हुआ ही नहीं।
नहीं हुई। So this was the query. I would not say query, the point you have raised. So to the best of my capability, I have tried to answer it.
छवि मैडम कहाँ गई? छवि
Chavi
मैडम
ma'am,
इज
by
नॉट ऑन
chance.
द पैनलिस्ट लिस्ट।
Hmm.
चलिए कोई बात
चलो,
नहीं।
in any case.
So it is amazing deliberation and equally well responded queries. Sir,
Yes.
your ease, I would say, the convenience with the subject, the comfort you have gained with the subject is par excellence, Arpit ji. And we all across the country cherish to listen to you, read to you. आपने इनफैक्ट आई मस्ट मेंशन दैट आपने जो अर्स्ट वाइल लॉ के या दूसरे और जूरिस्प्रूडेंस को आपने जीएसटी के साथ कनेक्ट करके उसके साथ उसकी इंटरप्रिटेशन को और उसकी ऑपरेशन को ईज आउट किया है और ज्यादा एग्जेम्पलीफाई किया है सर, वो अनपैरेलल है। ऐसा और कोई प्रोफेशनल मुझे भी भारत में नजर नहीं आता है सर। एंड मैं ये पूरी जिम्मेदारी के साथ आपको कह रहा हूँ सर, क्योंकि मैं पहले भी कहा मैं भी इसी सब्जेक्ट का शिष्य हूँ, स्टूडेंट हूँ। तो आपका यहाँ आना अपने आप में एक बहुत बड़ी बात है सर। हमारे चेयरमैन साहब भी बहुत खुश थे जब मैंने
मैंने
उनको आपका
प्रपोज योर
नाम
नेम।
बताया। हाँ, मैंने उनको नाम बताया कि अर्पित जी को
तो
मैंने रिक्वेस्ट किया है। तो अनुज जी बड़े खुश हुए कि आपने बहुत बढ़िया व्यक्ति जो है, पर्सन जो है सेलेक्ट किए हैं।
वन ऑफ द बेस्ट स्पीकर इन इंडिया सर।
अरे सर,
वन ऑफ द बेस्ट इन इंडिया।
सर हम सब
आप
स्टूडेंट है सर जीएसटी के।
हाँ
सर वी ऑल आर
है
स्टूडेंट,
सर।
बट वी ऑल लर्निंग फ्रॉम ईच अदर एंड वी लाइक टू
आप
लर्न फ्रॉम
मेधावी,
यू आल्सो सर।
आप मेधावी छात्र हैं सर। हम थोड़े से बैक बेंचर वाले स्टूडेंट हैं।
हम
स्टूडेंट तो
आपसे
मैं और
चिटिंग
अनुज
करके
जी
आगे काम करा
दोनों ही
चला
हैं।
लेते हैं।
हाँ, मैं और अनुज जी दोनों ही इसी सब्जेक्ट के
हम आप
स्टूडेंट
लोग
हैं।
आपसे चिटिंग करके काम चला लेते हैं सर।
नहीं
आपने 180 डेज के ऊपर जो एक बात कही थी कि अगर किसी सप्लायर ने अपना राइट टू रिकवर द मनी विद इन 180 डेज फोरगो कर दिया है एज पर कॉन्ट्रैक्ट एक्ट, तो ये पूरा का पूरा सेकंड प्रोवाइजो फेल हो जाता है। तो आपने केस लॉज भी बताए थे सर। मैंने वो आर्टिकल आपका फेडरेशन के न्यूज़लेटर में छपा था, मैंने बहुत ध्यान से पढ़ा था, वो मुझे अच्छे से याद है। बहुत अच्छा पॉइंट आपने रेज किया सर। ऐसे मैं कॉन्टिन्यूसली आपके बारे में बोल सकता हूँ। आज का प्रोग्राम बहुत सुपर फैबुलस रहा और हमारे पार्टिसिपेंट्स अभी भी लगभग 100 लोग सर जो है आपका वोट ऑफ थैंक्स सुनने के लिए बैठे हुए हैं। क्वेरीज खत्म हो चुकी है। वोट ऑफ थैंक्स के लिए लोग नहीं बैठते हैं, फटाफट भाग जाते हैं, बट आपको थैंक यू करने के लिए सर अराउंड 100 लोग अभी भी हमारे पार्टिसिपेंट्स बैठे हुए हैं। मैं आपका बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद देता हूँ। पूरी फेडरेशन के नॉर्थ जोन का धन्यवाद देता हूँ। हमारे चेयरमैन जो नॉर्थ जोन के अनुज जी हैं उनका धन्यवाद देता हूँ। हमारे अभी को कन्वेनर छवि मैडम, उनका सेक्रेटरी साहब, हमारे विकास वस्त जी, वासु गोयल जी, विशाल शर्मा जी, हमारे बहुत सारे और सीनियर मेंबर्स, फेडरेशन के सीनियर पदाधिकारी सर जो हैं वो यहाँ पर अभी जुड़े हुए थे इस प्रोग्राम में। बहुत सारे लोगों के मैसेजेस आए मुझे अभी कि हम भी, हमारे चेयरमैन 2 जोन के जुड़े हुए थे और बहुत सारे सीनियर मेंबर्स फ्रॉम द प्रोफेशन और बहुत सारे सर हमारे ऑफिसर्स, कम से कम 5-7 ऑफिसर्स को मैं पर्सनली आइडेंटिफाई करा कि वो हमारे साथ पूरे सेशन में जुड़े रहे। एक सवाल जो सर्कुलर इशूड है जुरिस्डिक्शन का विदाउट मॉनेटरी लिमिट, वो भी एक सीनियर ऑफिसर फ्रॉम श्रीनगर किसी ने पूछा था आपसे सर, आपने जिसका जवाब दिया। तो आप इससे पता लगा सकते हैं सर किस तरह के पार्टिसिपेंट्स, किस तरह की ऑडियंस आपको सुन रही थी। देवर सो ऑलरेडी अकम्प्लिश्ड एंड ग्रेटरली प्लेस्ड, लेकिन आपको सुनने के लिए सब आतुर थे सर, आपको सुनने के लिए।
एआईएफटीपी के प्लेटफॉर्म पे आना इसलिए अच्छा भी लगता है क्योंकि यहाँ पे जो ऑडियंस आते हैं वो इन्फॉर्म्ड ऑडियंस है। सो
इन्फॉर्म
उनके सामने बोलना भी मेरे को अच्छा लगता है क्योंकि चाहे मैं बोल रहा हूँ तो 2 चीजें हम आपसे भी सीख के जाएंगे
सर
सर।
हम आपको सुन के लगता है कि हम इन्फॉर्म्ड है ही नहीं, हमें तो।
राइटली पॉइंटेड आउट। मैंने कहा ना, आर्मर को जिस तरह से आपने डाइसेक्ट किया,
ट्रू
जिस तरह
ट्रू
से डिफरेंशिएट किया,
ट्रू
मुझे नहीं लगता किसी और ने अभी तक इस बारे में बात की, लिंक्डइन पे भी, कहीं भी। यूट्यूब पे तो खैर
ट्रू।
मटेरियल है ही नहीं। आपसे रिक्वेस्ट करूंगा सर, आप भी यूट्यूब पे कुछ वीडियोस बनाने शुरू करें, क्योंकि आपकी नॉलेज को आम लोगों तक पहुंचाइए, वो उनकी हेल्प होगी सर।
जरूर
अच्छा,
सर, थैंक यू सर।
Rajinder,
इसको
please share the
कंसीडर
PPT
कीजिए।
if you have received PPT from sir.
हाँ, मैं
Then please
अभी
share
भेज
in the
दूंगा।
executive group. Then we'll
हाँ,
circulate
अभी भेज दूंगा।
massively.
थैंक यू वेरी मच एवरीवन, थैंक्स फॉर द
Thank you,
पार्टिसिपेंट्स।
Arpit ji.
थैंक यू अर्पित जी, थैंक यू
Thank
एवरीवन,
you, please.
थैंक्स। थैंक
थैंक
यू
यू अनुज
योगेश
जी,
जी।
थैंक यू योगेश
Thank
जी,
you. Bye.
आई एम
Thank you,
सॉरी,
thank you,
थैंक यू
sir.
राजेश।